take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop. Wherever you are right now, curled up under a blanket, lying in the dark with your phone resting somewhere close, or settling into that comfortable, almost asleep space where the world goes quiet and soft, you are welcome here. Tonight we are going to travel somewhere ancient and strange, a world of crumbling stone and dying fire, of gods who ruled through fear instead of love, of ordinary men and women who stumbled into the greatest secrets in the universe and were never the same again. We are going into the lore of Dark Souls. Now, if you have played these games, you already know the feeling. The way you walk through a fog gate into a new area and your eyes catch something, a statue with a missing face, a throne that sits empty at the end of a long, dead hall, an item description that raises more questions than it answers. Dark Souls does not tell you its story. It leaves it in fragments, scattered like broken pottery across the floors of collapsed libraries and forgotten dungeons. And you collect the pieces slowly, and you hold them up to what little light remains, and you try to understand what they once were. Some of those mysteries have answers. Some of them have many possible answers, and some of them are genuinely, beautifully, permanently unresolved. Open spaces in the narrative that the game leaves dark on purpose, because some things are more powerful as questions than they could ever be as explanations. Tonight we are going to sit with all of them, the ones that are almost solved, the ones that have been debated for years, the ones that exist at the very edge of what the game is willing to tell us, right where the firelight ends and the darkness begins. What makes Dark Souls' mysteries different from the mysteries you find in other games is the texture of them. In most games, if something is unexplained, it feels like an oversight, a thread the writers meant to tie up and did not, or a detail they considered too small to develop. In Dark Souls, the unexplained things feel deliberate. They feel like silence being used the way a musician uses silence, as part of the composition, as necessary negative space around the things that are stated. You know something has been left out because you can feel the shape of it. You can run your fingers along the edges of the absence and understand, roughly, what was there. The game expects you to do this. It trusts you to do this. And the community that has grown up around the series, the lore scholars, the item description readers, the people who spend hours parsing Japanese text against English translations to find the places where things got lost. That community is the proof that the trust was justified. So let the tension leave your body. Let your breathing go slow and easy. You do not need to memorize any of this. You do not need to follow every thread. Just let the words wash over you like the last embers of a dying fire, warm and dim and quiet. And if you drift away somewhere in the middle of all this ancient mystery, that is exactly as it should be. Let us begin. Part 1. The Furtive Pygmy, and the question that started everything. Before there were cities or gods or kingdoms, before the grand cathedral of Anor Londo rose above the clouds, before a single knight ever raised a sword against a dragon, there was darkness. The world of Dark Souls begins in a state called the Age of Ancients, a flat, gray, timeless place where nothing much happened. Immortal stone dragons ruled everything, and the world just sat there, unchanging, like a room where someone left the lights off and forgot to come back. There was no heat and no cold, no life and no death, no light and no dark. Just a vast, featureless gray existence stretching on into forever. And then something changed. Deep in the earth, in some hollow place beneath all that gray stone, a fire ignited, the first flame. And with it came something the world had never known before. Disparity. The concept of difference itself. Heat and cold appeared simultaneously. Life and death arrived together. Light burned into existence, and with it, for the first time, actual darkness. Not the passive gray absence of before, but a true darkness that existed only because light existed to define it. The fire drew creatures to it. Out of the darkness surrounding that first flame, shapes emerged. They found souls near the fire, great powerful concentrations of energy, and they claimed them, and they were transformed. They became lords. We know 3 of them well. Gwyn, who found a soul of sunlight and became the Lord of Sunlight, eventually ruler of the gods and father of an entire age. The Witch of Izalith, who found a soul of fire, and Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, who found a soul of death itself. These three took their souls and went to war against the everlasting dragons, and after a long and terrible conflict, they won. The dragons fell. The Age of Fire began. History as the world of Dark Souls knows it started turning, but there was a fourth, standing at the edge of that introductory cutscene in the original Dark Souls, barely visible, hunched and small, and almost swallowed by the light of the fire behind him, is the furtive pygmy. He holds something. The fourth Lord Soul, the last one. And then the story moves on. The three lords go to war, the dragons fall, the Age of Fire rises, and the furtive pygmy just vanishes. He is never seen again. He is never directly spoken of again, except in fragments, in rumor, in the whispering of a primordial serpent at the bottom of an abyss. Who was he? What happened to him? And why does everything in Dark Souls eventually trace back to the thing he found? The soul the furtive pygmy discovered was unlike the other three. While Gwyn's soul, Nito's soul, and the witch's soul were each singular and powerful, great concentrations of energy that made their wielders into gods, the pygmy's soul did something different. He called it the Dark Soul, and rather than use it to make himself powerful, rather than go to war with it or build a kingdom on its strength, the pygmy fragmented it. He broke his soul into pieces, countless pieces, and he gave those pieces away. Miyazaki himself, in a rare interview, described the pygmy's act in almost parental terms. The image, he said, was something like an ancestor. He found the Lord's soul, fragmented it, and humanity were like the fragments of it. Every single human being who has ever lived in the world of Dark Souls carries a piece of that original Dark Soul within them. That piece is what the game calls humanity, those small, soft, dark sprites that you collect and use to reverse hollowing, that pool and gather in your chest and make you feel warm and real again. What this means is staggering when you let it settle. Every person, every undead pilgrim dragging themselves along a ruined road, every knight who once stood at a castle gate, every weeping woman in a chapel, every hollow shambling through a collapsed village, all of them carry a piece of the original Dark Soul. All of them are, in a profound sense, children of the furtive pygmy, descendants not just biologically, but spiritually, inheritors of the most powerful soul that ever existed. And the pygmy knew this would matter. He knew that one day the fire would fade. He knew that when it faded, the darkness within humanity, that fragment of the Dark Soul that each person carries, would stir, would want to rise, would seek to bring about an age of dark, an age of humanity, where the world belonged to the children of the pygmy rather than to the gods who had ruled for so long. He claimed the Dark Soul, and he waited for the fire to subside. That is Kata's account, the only direct testimony we have about the pygmy's intentions. Kathi is a primordial serpent, a vast ancient serpent thing that exists in the abyss at the bottom of New Londo's ruins, one of two beings of his kind that move through the story as something between messengers and manipulators. And Kathi tells you that your entire journey, your entire quest through Lordran, is actually a repetition of something the pygmy set in motion long, long ago. You are a descendant of the pygmy. You carry a fragment of his soul, and the destiny he imagined for himself, to be the Dark Lord who rules an age of dark, is now yours to claim, or refuse. That choice sits at the heart of the original game, but the pygmy himself is gone, and the question of where he went, what he became, has never been definitively answered. There are two theories that have circulated through the community since the game released, both compelling, both built on real evidence, and both ultimately inconclusive. The first is Manus. In the Artorias of the Abyss expansion, the player is pulled back in time to the ancient land of Oolacile, a kingdom of sorcerers and golden light that existed long before Lordran as we know it. And at the heart of the catastrophe that destroyed Oolacile, you find Monos. He is described everywhere as the primeval man, a human who existed in ancient times, who was buried, who was dug up by the people of Oolacile at the urging of a serpent, who was driven mad by the disturbance of his rest and the theft of his broken pendant, and whose humanity went wild. Not just out of control, wild in the way that only the most concentrated most powerful concentration of humanity imaginable, could go wild. His body became enormous and wrong and shadowed. He became the father of the abyss. He began spreading darkness across Oolacile, consuming everything, corrupting the citizens, pulling them into his despair, reaching across time itself to drag a specific person, you, back to that age. The soul of Manus, when you examine it after his defeat, reads as a viscous, lukewarm lump of gentle humanity. Ancient Manus was clearly once human, but the degree to which his humanity exceeded any normal human's, the sheer impossible quantity of the dark soul within him, suggests something more than an ordinary man. The theory goes that Manus was the furtive pygmy himself, sleeping in that grave, having lived for untold ages on the longevity that the dark soul granted him, waiting for the fire to subside as Cathy described, only to be disturbed and maddened before his plan could come to fruition. It fits in ways that are hard to dismiss. Manus is described as primeval, existing before recorded history in Lordran. His humanity is beyond anything ever seen. A primordial serpent was involved in his awakening, which mirrors the serpent's known role in the larger pygmy story. The pendant he was looking for, that small, broken thing that drove him to reach across centuries, echoes the secrecy and the smallness that define the pygmy in the opening cutscene. But then, Dark Souls 3 arrived and brought the Ringed City with it, and suddenly there was another candidate. Ludleth of Corlin sits on one of the 5 thrones of Linking and Firelink Shrine. He is small, noticeably, pointedly small, described as a man of small stature, even by the modest standards of the world. He is already a Lord of Cinder when you meet him, already sacrificed himself to link the flame at some point in the past, and he speaks in a way that consistently suggests he is carrying a secret he is choosing not to share. He mentions repeatedly that he linked the flame of his own free will, in a way that almost sounds defensive, like a man protesting something no one asked about. In the ashes of Ariandel expansion, the evidence thickens. The painted world and its connection to the dark soul, the specific details about who can create such things, the nature of the pigment required, all of it points in Ludleth's direction in ways that Dark Souls scholars spent months unpacking after release. And then there are the Pygmy Lords in the Ringed City itself. The rulers of the Ringed City, the city that Gwyn gave to the descendants of the furtive pygmy as both a gift and a cage, are diminutive, ancient beings who have held the concentrated bloodline of the Dark Soul for an unimaginable span of time. They sit on small thrones in a mausoleum at the edge of the world. By the time you reach them, the end of everything has already arrived, and most of them are dead or dying, their blood dried up, their power spent, with Slave Knight Gale moving through them like a plague, drinking what remains of the Dark Soul from their ruined bodies. One of them is still alive when you arrive, crawling, pulling himself along the floor with whatever remains of his strength, making his way toward Filianor's chamber, calling out to her. He wears no crown. His robes are dark. He wants you to wake Filianore. He wants the end to come. He seems, in some small way, glad. Whether this last survivor is the furtive pygmy himself, returned to witness the conclusion of his original plan, or simply the last of his bloodline, the game does not say. It never says. The pygmy remains furtive to the very end, secretive, hidden, slipping away from history, just as he slipped away from that opening cutscene, clutching his dark soul, waiting for a flame that never fully goes out. That waiting is maybe the most haunting thing about the character. The world turns, gods rise and fall, kingdoms are built and consumed, the fire is linked again and again and again, each time costing someone everything, each time buying only a little more time before the darkness rises again. And somewhere in all of that, the furtive pygmy is patient. He built his plan into the fabric of humanity itself. He made it so that every human being who has ever lived carries the seed of what he wanted. He made himself unnecessary to the outcome, because the outcome was already written into every soul he scattered. The fire will fade, the dark will come, and the age of men, whatever that actually means, however that actually looks, will be waiting on the other side of the last ember. That was always the plan. If you are settling in and finding this interesting, I want to take a small moment to ask something of you. If you are watching this on YouTube and you have not subscribed yet, consider hitting that button. It means a great deal, and it helps these long, slow explorations of strange worlds find the people who need them most. And if you have thoughts, a theory about the pygmy, a favorite Dark Souls mystery you want covered, leave it in the comments. I genuinely read them, and they shape where these videos go next. Now, back into the dark. Part 2. Gwyn's True Fear and the First Sin. There is a version of the Dark Souls story in which Lord Gwyn is a hero. He found a great soul at the edge of the first flame. He used its power to wage a war against the immortal dragons who had ruled the world since before time had meaning. He won that war at tremendous cost and ushered in an age of light and civilization and growth. He ruled from his great city of Anor Londo, radiant and golden, and for a long time the world thrived under his watch. And then, when the fire began to fade and everything he had built was threatened with extinction, he sacrificed himself to keep it burning. He walked into the kiln of the first flame, and he burned, consumed his own soul to feed the flame, becoming the Lord of Cinder, a god who gave everything to protect what he had made. That is the story Anor Londo tells. That is what the opening of the game presents. That is what Kingseeker Frampt, the other primordial serpent, the polite one, the one who greets you warmly and calls you chosen and tells you that your destiny is to link the fire, wants you to believe. But there is another version, and you hear it in the Abyss from Kata, who tells things differently. In Kata's account, Gwyn was afraid, not of the dragons, not of war or death, or the ordinary dangers a powerful being might fear. What Gwyn was afraid of was humanity. Specifically, what humanity carried inside it. That fragment of the dark soul, that seed of something vast and ancient and alien to the light Gwyn had built his world around, was growing. Humans were different from gods, and their power was self-replicating in a way that Gwyn's soul was not. When the gods divided their souls, those divisions grew weaker. Split a lord's soul enough times, and each piece is less than the whole. But the dark soul, the one the pygmy fragmented and distributed, did not work that way. Each human's piece of humanity was complete in itself, whole and growing, not diminished by replication. Kade puts it plainly. Humanity is infinite in a way Gwyn's power is not. And Gwyn understood that. He understood that the natural end of the Age of Fire was not just darkness, it was humanity. It was the inheritors of the dark soul coming into their own, reclaiming what was theirs, potentially overturning the order that Gwyn had imposed. And Gwyn could not allow that. So he did something that Kade calls the first sin, though the game plays with that phrase and applies it to different actions depending on who is speaking. Gwyn burned a mark, a ring of fire, into the flesh of every human, the dark sign. He used the power of the first flame itself to create a seal around the darkness within each human soul, suppressing it, dampening it, making humans smaller and more mortal and less capable of accessing what they really were. He made humanity dependent on the flame. He made humans need fire to maintain their sense of self, so that as the fire faded, instead of flourishing into what they were meant to be, they would hollow. They would lose themselves, become empty, become the undead curse that drives the plot of every game in the series. This is the cruelty at the center of the story. The undead curse, the thing that makes Dark Souls what it is, the endless dying and reviving, the slow loss of self that turns people into hollows, the existential horror of a mind wearing down until nothing is left. This is not a natural disaster. It is not an accident. It is Gwyn's design, built into humanity specifically to prevent what the pygmy planned. The curse exists to make humans burn themselves up on the altar of the first flame, rather than let the fire go out naturally and let the Age of Dark begin. Every hollow you have ever killed in these games, every shambling, empty, dead-eyed thing wandering a ruin with no memory of who it was, is a person who lost themselves, not because they were weak, but because a god decided, long ago, that their nature was a threat. The dark sign stole something from every human being ever born in Lordran. It stole their birthright, their darkness, their portion of the original soul. This reframes Gwyn's sacrifice in a completely different light. When he walks into the kiln and burns, it is not a purely noble act. It is the logical extension of a long campaign of control. He has suppressed humanity for centuries. He has manipulated the undead curse to funnel human souls toward the flame. He has built an entire religion, the Way of White, the prophecy of the chosen undead, around the idea that linking the fire is humanity's sacred purpose. And then, when all of that is no longer enough, when the flame is fading despite everything, he sacrifices his own body to buy more time. Not for humanity, for the Age of Fire, for his age, and the tragedy is that it works. And then, it works again. And again. By the time of Dark Souls 3, the linking of the fire has become a wheel that grinds up lord after lord, century after century, with less and less kindling each time, buying smaller and smaller reprieves, while the world accumulates its dead and its ash and its hollow, becoming grayer and more exhausted with each revolution of the cycle. The Witch of Izalith tried to shortcut the whole process. When it became clear that the first flame was going to fade no matter what, she attempted to recreate it, to forge a new first flame from her own soul. The experiment was catastrophic. She did not create fire, she created chaos. The flame of chaos tore through Izalith and transformed the witch herself into what became the bed of chaos, an enormous, terrible, still-living thing of fire and corruption that spread chaos across the land, created the first demons, and destroyed everything her civilization had built. Her daughters were scattered. Her city became the hellish lost Izalith that players explore in the original game, full of the tortured remnants of what once lived there. And Gwyn, watching all of this, made his calculation. Better to sacrifice himself than to risk another Izalith. Better to buy time than to attempt innovation. He was afraid. Every decision Gwyn ever made flows from that fear. Fear of the Age of Dark. Fear of what humans would become if the fire went out. Fear of the darkness he saw gathering in the fragments of the pygmy's soul. Fear that the great civilization he had built was not the natural order of the universe, but only a temporary condition, a fire that could burn brightly or not at all, with nothing in between. Here is what makes Catha's argument so seductive, and also so suspect. He presents Gwyn's fear as illegitimate, as selfishness masquerading as heroism, and he presents the Age of Dark as humanity's natural inheritance, something beautiful and right that was stolen from them by a paranoid god. But we never see the Age of Dark. Not clearly, not cleanly. The untended graves in Dark Souls 3 show a version of Firelink Shrine in absolute darkness, a place where the fire never came, where everything is cold and black and Champion Gundyr arrived too late to any of the ceremonies that mattered. It is desolate in a way that is hard to read as humanity flourishing. The Abyss, which is the closest we come to seeing the raw power of the Dark Soul uncontrolled, is a place of madness and consumption, and things reaching out of darkness to drag you in. Maybe Gwyn was right to be afraid. Or maybe the Abyss is what the Dark Soul looks like when it is repressed and distorted for thousands of years, when the dark sign keeps compressing it and suppressing it until it has nowhere to go except wild and destructive. Maybe the Age of Dark, if the fire had been allowed to fade naturally, without interference, without the curse, would have been something entirely different. Aldea, scholar of the First Sin, the optional final boss of Dark Souls 2, and perhaps the only character in the series willing to truly lay out the full scope of the problem, says something devastating near the end. He has spent centuries trying to escape the curse, to find a way out of the cycle, to understand whether there is any path that does not lead back to fire or dark or the same wheel turning again. And his conclusion is bleak. There is no answer, he says. There is only the question. Gwyn chose fire because he was afraid of the question, and the game invites you to decide, in the end, whether his choice was wisdom or cowardice. Whether fear is ever a good enough reason to bind your children to a curse. The sun in Anor Londo is an illusion. The warmth is artificial. The Golden City was a mask over the same darkness as everything else, and the Lord of Sunlight built it all because something small and ancient and patient waited in the dark at the bottom of every human heart, and he could not bear to let it rise. Part 3. The Painted World and the Woman at the Center of It. There is a painting in Anor Londo. You might walk past it. Many people do, on their first time through that vast, bewildering cathedral. You are focused on the enemies, on the maze of corridors, on surviving. The painting is just part of the background, a large canvas mounted on a chapel wall depicting a cold, gray winter landscape, snow-covered towers, distant mountains, a world contained in a frame. But if you have the right item, a peculiar doll found in the cell of the Northern Undead Asylum where you started the entire journey, and if you walk close to that painting and look at it, something happens. The painting pulls you in. You step through the canvas and fall into the world inside it, and you land in snow, and the doors close behind you, and for a while, there is no way back. The painted world of Ariamis is one of Dark Souls' most beloved and most mysterious spaces. It is entirely optional. You never need to go there for any main quest reason, but people return to it again and again because it has a quality unlike anywhere else in the game. A stillness, a quiet melancholy, a sense of being somewhere that was built not for war or power or sacrifice, but for something closer to shelter. And at the center of it is Priscilla. She is extraordinary to encounter. You reach her at the end of the area after a long, strange journey through frozen courtyards and ancient chapels and the kinds of enemies that exist nowhere else in the game. Twisted things, crossbred creatures, beings that feel like the rejected experiments of a world that could not decide what to do with them. And then you open a door, and there she is, enormous and pale, half woman and half dragon, standing in the snow with long white hair and a luminous, almost sorrowful expression. She does not attack you. She asks you to leave. "This is a cold and gentle place," she says, or words to that effect, depending on translation. "The people here are quiet and kind. We do not want trouble." She offers you the way out, a ledge at the back of her arena where you can drop off and return to Anor Londo as though you were never there. She has no quarrel with you. All she asks is that you let her world be. And if you do attack her, which is optional, which is a choice the game gives you but never requires, she fights back with quiet, terrible effectiveness, using a scythe and a power called Life Hunt that drains the life from everything around her, and her death is not triumphant at all. It just feels like breaking something that was already fragile. Who is Priscilla? Who put her here? And why? The game tells us pieces of the answer. The world was created by someone called Ariamis, not a character we ever meet, just a name attached to the canvas. Ariamis made this painted world as a sanctuary, specifically for Priscilla, so that she could be left alone. The word sanctuary is doing a lot of work there. Sanctuary implies something that needed protecting, somewhere safe from something outside. Priscilla is described as a crossbreed, half dragon, half something else, something divine. The gods of Anor Londo feared her. Her ability, Life Hunt, is described as the antithesis of all life, which in a world of gods who derive their power from the first flame and from life and light, makes her categorically dangerous to them. She is something that should not exist by their logic. A combination of two things that were supposed to be enemies: the immortal stone of the ancient dragons and the divine blood of Anor Londo. The most compelling theory, and it has never been disproven and fits the available evidence extremely well, is that Priscilla is the daughter of Seath the Scaleless and one of the gods, possibly Guinevere. Seath was the dragon who betrayed his own kind to help Gwyn win the war. Gwyn rewarded him with the Duke's archives and the title of Duke, and Seath spent his immortality there, conducting experiments on beings both living and dead, obsessively seeking to understand the property of immortality he had never possessed. He is brilliant and unhinged, and the game makes clear that he has been doing things that no one entirely wants to look at too closely. Seath is the only other white-scaled being in Dark Souls. Priscilla is white. The resemblance is not subtle. If Priscilla is his daughter, born of whatever strange communion Seath managed with the divine, then she would be precisely the kind of abomination that Anor Londo could not openly deal with. Too powerful to ignore. Too connected to important people to simply execute. And so someone, Ariamis, whoever Ariamis was, a painter with access to both the first flame and the dark soul as creative pigment, made her a world, a small one, cold and quiet and filled with outcasts and refugees who had their own reasons to disappear from the official history of Lordran, because the painted world collects things Anor Londo does not want to deal with. The enemies there tell you this. The engorged hollows, the crow demons who are worshippers of Velka, the goddess of sin, whose influence saturates the area, The wheel skeletons and the phalanx creatures reminiscent of things from far older stories. These are not random inhabitants. They are beings who had no place anywhere else. Sinners, heretics, experiments gone wrong, things that fell between the categories the gods used to organize the world. Miyazaki himself said in an interview that he always thought of the painted world as a place where things go to escape. The birdmen, the crow demons, were designed as worshippers of Velka, whose bodies were warped by their devotion. Their presence in the painted world, combined with the Pardoner's set and other Velka-related items found there, suggests that the painted world had a specific relationship with the goddess of sin that the game never fully explains but clearly implies. Velka judges both gods and men. She would have known the sins committed in creating and discarding Priscilla. Her followers may have gathered in that painted world specifically in solidarity with someone else the gods had wronged. And then there is Ariamis, the painter, the one who made all of this. To create a painted world requires both the first flame and the dark soul as paint. That is established in Dark Souls 3 when we see a new painted world being created. This means Ariamis had access to both of the fundamental forces of the universe, fire and dark, which should be impossible for an ordinary person. Who was Ariamis? A scholar? A god? A human who had lived long enough and learned enough to work with forces that should have been beyond them? We never know. The name is all we have. What we do know is that the world Ariamis created for Priscilla became, over time, something she genuinely loved. She calls it peaceful. She calls the people there quiet and kind. She says this with sincerity, without bitterness. Whatever the world was created as, and the language of sanctuary has a double meaning, being both refuge and prison. Priscilla made it her own. She became its guardian, its mother, in a sense. Not a prisoner waiting to be freed, but someone who looked at the place she had been put and decided to make it worth keeping. That is either the most heartbreaking thing in the game, or the most quietly triumphant. And the fact that you cannot tell which says everything about how Dark Souls handles these moments. Priscilla is gone from Dark Souls 3. Her world is referenced, but she is not present. In her place is Oriandel, a painted world built by different hands, for different purposes, with a different atmosphere altogether. Cold still, snowbound still, but rotten now in a way Ariamis's world was not. The painted world of Oriandel burns with the fire that is needed to cleanse and renew it. And in those flames you catch glimpses of what these worlds are and what they cost. Some theories suggest that Priscilla may have had children, and that those children became something else entirely in the wider world. Company Captain Yorshka in Dark Souls 3, a pale, childlike figure trapped in a tower in Irithyll, carries a family resemblance that community members have mapped extensively. She has white hair, she speaks of parents she never knew, she reaches toward a painted world she has heard of only in stories. It would be characteristic of this series that Priscilla's quiet act of building something good in her exile eventually led to descendants she never knew about, people who inherited her strangeness and her loneliness and her fundamental inability to fit into the world that had been handed to them. The painted world of Ariamis is the smallest mystery in the game and the most intimate one. It asks what happens to the people history decides to discard. What do you build in the space you are given when that space is a painted frame and a cold winter that never ends? What do you become? Priscilla's answer was gentle. She became a guardian of quiet things. And when you visit her world and she asks you to leave, and you walk away from her into the snow and drop off the ledge back into Anor Londo, she is still standing there, still watching, still holding a place open for the unwanted. That world still exists inside that painting, on that chapel wall, in a city most people have already forgotten. Some things survive longer than anyone intended. Part 4. Gwendolyn and the Lie That Kept a City Alive. When you reach Anor Londo for the first time, you feel something shift. The whole game to that point has been ash and ruin and dimness. You have climbed through graveyards and crossed a poison swamp and navigated a fortress full of traps that felt designed specifically to humiliate you. And then you are carried by a great winged demon through open sky, and you land in Anor Londo, and the sun is shining, actual sunlight, warm and gold and abundant, flooding down across white stone buttresses and soaring Gothic architecture, making everything look clean and eternal and vast. After all that darkness, it feels like arriving. You are being deceived. Anor Londo was abandoned long before you arrived. Every deity except one left the city when it became clear that the Age of Fire was collapsing. They scattered to other places, or they became something else, or they simply ceased to be the beings they had once been. The city they left behind was dark and cold and empty. The famous golden sunlight, the warmth that made everything feel like arrival. It is an illusion, a projection maintained by one lonely god who decided, when everyone else left, to stay and keep pretending. Gwyndolin, the last child of Gwyn, the Dark Sun. Gwyndolin's story is one of the most quietly devastating in the series, built not through cutscenes or direct narration, but through fragments of description and a single room at the bottom of a rotating staircase, lit by pale moonlight. Gwyn's youngest child was born with an affinity for the moon. In the theology of Anor Londo, where Gwyn's sunlight was the supreme power and the ordering principle of the entire divine hierarchy, this was a problem. The moon was associated with darkness, with the void, with things that existed in contrast to the fire. And so Gwyn, who feared darkness so profoundly that he imprisoned humanity in a curse rather than allow it to flourish, raised his son as a daughter. Gwyndolin wore dresses and was taught to embody a role that was not his, because his actual nature was something his father did not know how to accommodate. This is stated plainly in the Dark Moon's seance ring description, which tells us that the ring was given to Gwyndolin in youth to make him behave as a girl, a ring given to a child to reshape them into something more acceptable to the people around them. It is one of the most human cruelties in a game full of divine ones. And Gwyndolin, despite everything, despite being shaped and redirected and denied the expression of his own nature, remained loyal to his father, obsessively, heartbreakingly loyal. When Gwyn walked into the kiln and burned, when his siblings and the other gods abandoned the city, when the sunlight died and the stone went cold, Gwyndolin stayed. He stayed, and he pulled together his considerable power over illusion, and he rebuilt the lie. He created a projection of his sister Guinevere, the one god everyone loved, the warm and radiant princess of sunlight, who represented everything good about the Age of Fire at its height. He made her enormous and beautiful, and maternal and welcoming, and he placed her in the room where the Lord Vessel waits, so that every undead who made it to Anor Londo would find her there, would receive from her the blessing and the direction that the prophecy of the chosen undead required, would be sent toward linking the fire and continuing the cycle. He also created the illusion of sunlight, the warm golden light flooding through Anor Londo's windows, making the city feel alive. All of it Gwyndolин's work, sustained through his will, maintained at what must have been tremendous ongoing cost, because illusions of that scale do not simply stay up. They need tending. He did this alone, for 1,000 years. What do you do with a character like that? A person who was reshaped against his nature as a child, who watched everyone he knew abandon the world he was devoted to, who chose not to leave, who spent 1,000 years maintaining a fiction of warmth and sunlight in a cold and empty city. Not for himself, not to gain anything, but because he could not let go of what his father had built even after his father was ash. The game lets you destroy it if you want. If you strike the illusion of Guinevere, she dissolves. The sunlight extinguishes. Anor Londo plunges into a permanent twilight, cold and dark, its silver nights vanishing and being replaced by Gwyndolин's own agents and a suddenly hostile firekeeper. And Gwyndolин's voice rings through the empty halls. You have committed blasphemy. You have broken what he maintained. He sounds furious. But underneath the fury there is something else, something that might be relief, if you listen to it with different ears. The weight of 1,000 years of illusion finally ending. The truth he was keeping from everyone, including maybe himself, finally out in the open. You can fight him after that, or after finding the path to his chamber through other means. The battle takes place in what appears to be an endless corridor, a hall that stretches impossibly far in both directions, through which Gwyndolin slowly retreats from you, firing silver arrows and sorceries that curve and hunt through the air, never stopping, never turning to face you directly, moving backward while attacking. It is a haunting fight. It has the quality of something trying to escape. His soul, if you take it, describes him as the guardian of deserted Anor Londo, not glorious, not powerful, deserted, a guardian of absence, a keeper of a place that everyone else left. The tragedy extends into Dark Souls 3, where the full picture of what happened to Gwendolyn becomes clear. By the time of that game, he has risen to become the central deity of what remains of the Old Order, the closest thing to a king the remnants of Gwyn's pantheon have. His Dark Moon Covenant has evolved into the official religion of Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, the frozen city that grew up in the shadow of old Anor Londo. He is worshipped, he is called the King of Gods, and he is being slowly eaten alive. Aldrich, one of the Lords of Cinder resurrected to link the fire, is a man who became something grotesque through decades of consuming other people, a vast, amorphous mass of flesh that moves like a tide and dreams of the future and has developed what he calls a fascination with the old gods of Anor Londo. He traveled to Irithyll specifically to find Gwendolyn. Pontiff Sullivan, who had taken control of the city, helped trap Gwendolyn for him. And Aldrich has been eating Gwendolyn alive for what the game implies is a very long time, slowly, carefully, savoring the experience, absorbing his memories and his power in the process of consuming him. When you fight Aldrich in Dark Souls 3, Gwendolyn is still alive. You can hear him underneath the battle. You can hear him in pain. He is not gone yet. Aldrich is using his body, wearing it like a puppet while his consumption is still incomplete. And when Aldrich is defeated, Gwendolyn finally, mercifully, dies. It is not a heroic death. It is an ending after an unimaginably long and difficult existence, in a body that was never quite his, in a city he kept alive long after he should have let it go, consumed at the last by something that saw his power and his loneliness as resources to exploit. But the covenant he built, the Blades of the Dark Moon, the blue warriors who appear to help those being invaded, who punish sinners and protect the defenseless, that persists. In Dark Souls 3, it has become the Way of Blue, one of the game's central covenants. Gwendolyn's final contribution to the world is a system of mutual protection that outlasted everything else he built. The Dark Sun, the last god in an abandoned city, the child who built a 1,000-year lie out of love for a father who had reshaped him into someone more convenient. Some of the most devastating things Dark Souls does are the ones it never explains. It just places them in the world and lets you walk past them, and sometimes you stop and look, and sometimes the weight of what you are looking at does not hit you until days later. Gwendolyn is like that. Part 5. The Nameless King and the Sun. Erased from history. There are 3 alcoves at the back of the room where you fight Ornstein and Smool. 2 of them hold statues. One is Gwyn, unmistakable in his flowing robes and crown. One is Guinevere, radiant and large-handed. The 3rd alcove is empty. Just a bare stone niche where something used to stand, in a room full of things that were clearly once grand and are now either present or conspicuously absent. Something was removed. Someone was erased. In the original Dark Souls, this is one of the most interesting fragments you come across, because the implication is large but the evidence is thin. We know from scattered item descriptions that Gwyn had a firstborn son, a god of war who inherited his father's lightning and used it to hunt dragons. We know this son was incredibly powerful, that he trained Dragonslayer Ornstein himself, that he was the leader of the Covenant of Sunlight, the original version of the Warriors of Sunlight, those gold-armored sun worshippers you can find, prostrating themselves before a crumbling statue throughout Lordran. We know the son did something that got him erased, stripped of his godhood, expunged from the official records, his name removed from everything, his statues pulled down. And we know nothing else in that game. Then Dark Souls 3 came, and at the very top of a hidden mountain, summoned by ringing a bell that no one told you to ring, there is an optional boss fight, the Nameless King. The evidence that the Nameless King is Gwyn's firstborn is overwhelming without ever crossing into explicit confirmation, which is entirely characteristic of how From Software handles these things. His weapon is called the Dragonslayer Sword Spear, a weapon from the Age of Gods, combining sword and spear the way a god who hunted dragons would have needed to. His crown closely resembles Gwyn's own crown. The description of the item says this directly, that it is said to closely resemble the crown of the First Lord. He wields lightning. He rides a storm drake named the King of the Storm, with an intimacy that speaks of decades of companionship. The soul you receive from defeating him describes a former king and war god who tamed a storm drake and led a lifetime of battle. And Dragonslayer Ornstein, the great knight who served as captain of the four knights of Gwyn, is described in Dark Souls 3 as the first knight of the sun's firstborn, who left Anor Londo to follow his master after the master was disgraced. Why was he erased? The answer is also on that mountaintop, in everything surrounding the boss fight. The Nameless King is at Archdragon Peak, a place where the path of the Dragon Covenant is practiced, where seekers of a draconic afterlife come to sit in meditation and try to touch something of what the original stone dragons were, and the Nameless King is there with them. He is not imprisoned there, he is not exiled there against his will. He chose it. He sided with the dragons. This is the betrayal that Anor Londo could not forgive. Gwyn's entire reign, his entire identity, his most defining act was the war against the everlasting dragons. The dragons were the enemy. They were the obstacle that had to be overcome for the Age of Fire to begin. They were, in Anor Londo's theology, the forces of unchanging stone and permanent death that the warmth of the first flame had saved the world from. To side with them was not simply a political disagreement. It was a rejection of everything Gwyn stood for and everything he had built. But the Nameless King, this warrior who had fought the dragons himself, who had spent his early years hunting them with the weapon designed specifically to kill them, at some point had a change of heart. We do not know the full story. We see only the aftermath. He tamed a storm drake. He learned to ride it. He led battles alongside it rather than against it. And over time, he made peace with the creatures he had once been bred to destroy. Was it the storm drake specifically that changed him? Some relationship formed on a battlefield that grew into something deeper than the logic of war could account for. The Nameless King is hollow-eyed and silent when you fight him. He does not speak. He does not rage. He fights with a grim competence that speaks of someone who has done this so many times that the mechanics of it no longer require thought. There is nothing triumphant in his manner, nothing desperate, just the quiet, ancient discipline of a very old warrior who has long since stopped needing victory to matter. When the King of the Storm falls in the first phase of the fight, the Nameless King kills his own companion. He drives his weapon into the dying dragon to absorb its soul, to take its power into himself for the final phase. This is described as an ancient custom, warriors consuming the souls of their mounts after a shared death. But it also looks like grief, like a man who has lived long enough to watch everything he loved die, who has made peace with being the last one standing because there is no other option. There is a theory that his name was Sen, that Sen's fortress, that brutal, elaborate proving ground that stands between the lower levels of Lordran and Anor Londo itself, was built under his watch, was perhaps named for him. The fortress is filled with serpent men, and serpents in this world are connected to dragons and to draconic sympathy in ways that are consistent with someone who had already begun his private defection from Gwyn's order. And a close examination of the broken sunlight altars found throughout Lordran and Drangleic and Lothric all seem to depict the same figure, a young warrior with a great spear, positioned where Gwyn's firstborn would logically stand. His name was carved out of history with the same thoroughness that his statue was removed from that alcove. What remained was only the shadow of where he used to stand, and the empty niche in the record where his name used to be, and eventually an eternal exile on a mountain at the edge of the world, sharing his existence with the creatures that had been his father's great enemies. It would be very like Gwyn's son to end up somewhere like that, the firstborn of a man so afraid of the dark that he cursed humanity rather than face it, choosing, in the end, a different kind of darkness. Not the darkness of the abyss or the hollow, but the darkness of forgetting, the darkness of being removed from the story, the darkness of a name that no one speaks anymore. Nameless King, that is all that is left of him. Part 6, Oolacile and the First Dark. What Manus actually was. The land of Oolacile no longer exists by the time any of the Dark Souls games take place. There is nothing left of it. No ruins marked with its name in Lordran, no descendants who remember it, no scholars who preserved its records. It vanished so completely and so long ago that it exists only in whispers, in the faded recollections of someone who was there. in the memories of a princess who was kidnapped from its golden fields, in the echoing testimony of an archer sitting at the top of a tower who watched the darkness swallow everything and could do nothing about it. To visit Oolacile, you have to be pulled there, a fragment of a broken pendant in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you are dragged backward through time itself, through whatever mechanism the game uses to rationalize the DLC, to witness a catastrophe that is already well underway by the time you arrive. Oolacile was a kingdom of sorcerers. Their magic was golden light, literally warmth and illumination shaped into spells, a form of sorcery more aligned with the divine than the typical gray magic of Vinheim or Lordran's academies. They lived near a great forest, and they had, as their neighbor, Princess Dusk of Oolacile's royal house, who was somehow imprisoned by an ancient stone golem that you might have already freed in the main game. They were, by all accounts, a gentle and sophisticated civilization, and they were manipulated into destroying themselves. A serpent approached them. We are not told which one, Keitha or Frampt or some other member of that strange species. And the serpent told them something that the game never reveals in full, but whose general shape is clear from the aftermath. That there was something in the darkness beneath their land, something ancient and powerful, something that could give them power they did not have and needed. The serpent told them to open the grave of the primeval man. They believed it. They dug. They found Manus. Whatever Manus was before they found him, sleeping, dead, waiting, existing in some state between all three, the act of digging him up and disturbing his rest and apparently taking his pendant from him was the trigger. His humanity went wild. The description of the soul of Manus says that ancient Manus was clearly once human, but became the father of the abyss after his humanity went wild, eternally seeking his precious broken pendant. Not his power, not his soul, his pendant. A small, personal object, something sentimental. The image of a being of immense cosmic power unraveling because someone took a piece of jewelry from him is both darkly comic and deeply sad. But it speaks to something important about what the dark soul actually is. It is not just power. It is not just darkness in the abstract cosmic sense. It is the self, the individual human self, with all its attachments and memories and love and grief and obsession. The dark soul, when it goes wild, does not become an abstract force of entropy. It becomes the most intense possible expression of individual desire, Manus reaching across time with massive dark arms, because he wants one specific broken thing back, a thing that mattered to him, for reasons we can only guess at. The citizens of Oolacile were not prepared for what they had woken. The abyss that poured out of Manus consumed them, not instantly, not dramatically, but in the way that darkness fills a room when the candle goes out, gradually and then all at once. Their humanity went wild too, in a smaller echo of Manus's own transformation. The townspeople you encounter in the Oolacile township area of the DLC are twisted and wrong, moving with a jerky, corrupted gait, their shapes distorted, their behavior purely aggressive. They are not beasts. They are not hollows. They are people whose inner darkness was pulled out of them by proximity to Manus, who had their self-possession stripped away and replaced with the raw overflow of what the dark soul is when it has nowhere to go. Knight Artorias came to fight Manus. He was one of the 4 knights of Gwyn, perhaps the most renowned, the Abyss Walker, the one who had developed the ability to travel through the abyss without being consumed by it, whose very greatness made him the natural choice to send against a growing darkness. He came with his wolf companion, Seath, and he fought his way into the heart of the abyss. He did not win. Manus broke him. Before the final confrontation, Artorias sacrificed his own ability to resist the abyss in order to protect Seath. He extended his barrier around his companion, leaving himself exposed, leaving himself vulnerable to exactly the thing he had come to fight. And the abyss took him. It corrupted him. The famous Artorias of the Abyss Walker, the knight whose legend was great enough to echo forward through centuries, was hollowed by the abyss before anyone knew what had happened. When you fight Artorias in the DLC, you are fighting someone who has been lost. His arm is broken, the one that held his great shield, so he fights with a great sword in his weaker hand and compensates with agility and aggression and the manic energy of someone who is no longer quite in control of themselves. He is still Artorias. The skill is still there, the power is still real. But the person inside that skill is gone. You defeat him, and what you defeat is not Artorias making a choice to fight you. It is what the Abyss made of him after he lost. And then you fight Manus himself. The chamber where you find him is beneath everything, deep underground, at the center of the darkness that has consumed all of Oolacile. He is enormous, grotesque, shadow-limbed. He moves with an unpredictability that speaks of a mind that is not quite thinking the way human minds think anymore, that is driven by something more primal than strategy or anger, reaching, always reaching, for something that he has not found and maybe cannot find anymore. His magic, as you study the spell descriptions after the fight, is revealing. The Pursuer's spell pursues its target not because it is designed to chase, but because it is described as a fragment of his humanity-given will, a will that feels envy, or perhaps love, and despite the inevitably tragic ending, sees no alternative and is driven madly toward its target. Envy or love. Two things that look similar when they are desperate enough. He wanted his pendant back. That is the whole story. A man was buried with a memento of something that mattered to him, and people took it from him, and he never forgave them for it, and the grief of that loss was so much larger than anyone could have anticipated, because the grief was not coming from an ordinary man. It was coming from whoever the furtive pygmy had become, from the original holder of the dark soul, from the ancestor of all of humanity. And his grief had the weight of everything behind it. After Manus was defeated, he did not simply end. His soul shattered, the way powerful things do in this series, and the fragments reassembled over time became something new, became the daughters of the Abyss. Nashandra was the smallest fragment, the one that took form first, precisely because being smallest and most fragile made the hunger for power most acute. But there were others, Elena, Aldana, Nadalia, each one a different aspect of Manus, his rage, his sorrow, his fear, his desire, each one alive and moving through the world, seeking something that would fill the hole where the dark soul used to be. What Manus looked for in his grave, whatever that pendant meant, whatever memory it carried, no one ever found out. The pendant exists in the game as an item you can pick up in the main game, a small broken object with a description that says, it means something, but does not say what. You can carry it all the way through the DLC. You can hold it in front of Manus himself, and it will not calm him. Whatever it needed to be, it is not that anymore. The meaning died with the civilization that once knew it. The father of the Abyss went to his grave, carrying something he loved. And when the grave was opened, everything that love had kept in check came pouring out. Part 7. The Giants' War and what Nashandra actually wanted. There is a great sea to the north of Drangleic. Most people do not think about it. The kingdom of Drangleic sits behind natural barriers on 3 sides, mountains to the west, south, and east. And the sea to the north seems like simply the edge of the world that matters. Out there, beyond the gray water, there are lands, other kingdoms, other civilizations, other histories entirely separate from the cycle of fire and dark that consumes Lordran's lineage. One of those lands is home to the Giants. The Giants are enormous, primitive-seeming in the way of beings that do not need refinement because they have power. They wield boulders on sticks for weapons, and their bodies, when they die, turn into trees, which is one of the strangest and most evocative things about them. The Giants of Dark Souls 2 are so rooted to the earth that their mortality looks like planting. They turn into forests. They become part of the land that bore them. They had a king, a giant lord who led them and represented them, and wore his crown even going into battle, which is either touching or impractical, depending on your perspective. But either way speaks to a creature with a sense of identity and pride, and the trappings of civilization that the lazy reading of the word giant tends to miss. They were, as far as anyone can tell from what the game gives us, peaceful. They had their land, they had their kingdom, they had whatever it is giants find sacred, and they kept to themselves. And they had no particular quarrel with the humans across the sea. And then a woman came to Vendrick. Her name was Nashandra. She arrived alone from a distant land, beautiful in a way that seemed impossible and disturbing in retrospect. An unparalleled beauty, the kind described in fairy tales as a warning rather than a compliment. She warned Vendrick of the giants, She told him there was a threat growing across the northern sea, a looming crisis, an invasion being planned. She told him to strike first. She told him to cross the ocean and claim the giant's strength before they could bring it to bear against Drangleic. Vendrick listened. He crossed the sea with his army and invaded the giant's homeland, which had done nothing to provoke this and was entirely unprepared for it. He pillaged their lands. He killed their people. He captured survivors and brought them back to Drangleic, where his brother Aldea conducted experiments on them, using their souls, their biology, their unique connection to the earth, to create the golems that would build Drangleic Castle. He stole an artifact from the giants, something the game never fully names but refers to consistently as a prize, something important enough that the giants would cross the ocean to retrieve it. And he made Nashandra his queen, as a gesture of affection, as a monument to the war they had waged together. The giants invaded in response. Of course they did. Their king led them across the sea, and they set siege to Drangleic Castle and attacked settlements and fought for generations, because what Vendrick did to them was not just defeat in battle, but the systematic destruction of their civilization and the exploitation of their bodies and souls. The war eventually ground down. The giant lord was defeated. The remaining giants were pushed back. Drangleic was left standing but wounded, depleted of manpower, exhausted from decades of conflict. Its people scattered, and its king slowly, privately beginning to understand what he had done and why. Nashandra is a shard of Manus. When Manus was defeated in Oolacile and his soul shattered, the pieces scattered and eventually took human form. Nashandra was the tiniest piece, the most fragile fragment, and precisely because of that fragility, she was the most hungry. She was born of the dark with an insatiable lust for strength. She felt her smallness as an inadequacy and spent her entire existence trying to compensate for it. She sought powerful rulers not out of love or even manipulation for its own sake, but because their power was something she could consume. She was Manus's want, given human form, his craving stripped of everything else and set loose in the world to find what it needed. What Nashandra wanted was the Throne of Want. In the lore of Dark Souls 2, the Throne of Want is the place from which someone could become a true lord, a being powerful enough to link the fire or to let it die and face whatever comes after. It is the ultimate position, the seat from which the fate of the world is decided, and Nashandra needed someone with a great soul to take it, because she could not do it herself. Her fragment was too small, too weak. She needed to consume Vendrick's soul, to grow strong enough through him. She manipulated the Giants' War to weaken Drangleic, a kingdom at war for generations, losing its best warriors, burning through its resources. That is a kingdom that eventually crumbles. And when it crumbled, when the undead curse arrived on top of the war's damage, when Vendrick finally understood what Nashandra was and fled to the undead crypt to die alone rather than let her have what she wanted, she moved on to the next phase. She waited for a new heir to arrive, someone bearing the curse, someone who would be used, as Vendrick had been used, to clear the path to what she wanted. That is the bearer of the curse, you. What Nashandra represents is not just political manipulation or personal ambition, though it is those things too. She represents what happens to the dark soul when it is fragmented small enough and traumatized enough. The dark soul, in the pygmy's hands, was generosity. It was the impulse to give, to share, to create humanity from your own selfhood. In Nashandra's hands, that same energy has been inverted by its smallness and its hunger into pure consumption. She takes rather than gives. She fills herself with others rather than emptying herself for them. The question the lore leaves open is whether this inversion is what the dark soul always becomes when it is too small or too lonely, or whether Nashandra represents a particular corruption. Whether the other daughters of the Abyss, Ilana, Aldana, are equally driven by consumption, or whether the dark soul can manifest differently depending on circumstances. Alsana, the fragment who ends up in the Ivory King DLC, chooses something different. She falls in love with the Ivory King. She mourns him when he falls. She willingly seals herself in ice to contain the chaos, to protect the world from the things she helped awaken. If Nashandra is Manus's want, Alsana may be his sorrow, the grief of something ancient and powerful that has lost everything and wants only to make amends. The Giants of Dark Souls 2 never communicate with the player. Not once. They are the only major faction in the game that never speaks, never explains itself, never offers its perspective. They are just there, enormous, suffering, turning into trees when they die. They are the collateral damage. The people Vendrick crossed the sea to destroy, because a beautiful woman with unparalleled eyes told him there was a threat that had to be stopped before it arrived. There was no threat. There never was. She invented it. The giants just wanted to be left alone. One of the memories you can access through the Ash and Mist Heart, the mechanism that lets you enter the memories of fallen things, is the memory of a giant named Jai. In that memory, the final battle of the Giants' War is playing out. You can watch as the last Giant Lord falls. You can see the human soldiers he fought, and the atmosphere of that memory is not triumphant from any direction. It is just the last frames of something ending, giants falling and not getting up, soldiers exhausted and frightened, a war that everyone involved has been fighting for so long that the original cause is just noise. The prize Vendrick stole was never recovered. We never definitively learn what it was. Some scholars believe it was a dragon or a dragon egg, evidence that the giants had some connection to the draconic lineage that Aldea wanted to study and recreate. Others believe it was something else entirely, something the giants considered sacred in a way that the humans who took it had no framework to understand. Whatever it was, the giants went to war over it for generations. Whatever it was, it mattered enough to the giant lord that his resentment of Vendrick persisted even after death, his memory acting on Vendrick's hollow form, even after both of them are gone, weakening the undead king every time you enter his presence. The giants did not get justice. They got only the slow comfort of trees. Part 8. The Ringed City and the Deal That Shaped Humanity. At the very end of all things, past the dreg heap where ages of history have collapsed and crushed together, past the silver swamps and the archways that have stood since before any of the kingdoms we have explored had names, there is a city. It sits at the literal edge of the world, where the ground ends and whatever is beyond the world begins. It is surrounded by a ring of walls as though whoever built it was trying to keep it in place, to prevent it from sliding off the edge. It is beautiful in a way that is quiet and specific, not the grand golden beauty of Anor Londo or the baroque complexity of Lothric, but the beauty of somewhere that has been tended lovingly for an incomprehensibly long time. Flowering plants wind through the ruins. The stonework is ancient but maintained. It has the feeling of a place where people actually lived and kept living long after everything else had stopped. This is the Ringed City, and it was built specifically to contain humanity. The story of how it was built traces back to the original deal between Gwyn and the furtive pygmy's bloodline. The arrangement that sits underneath the entire history of the series like a foundation stone that nobody talks about, because talking about it would mean admitting what it actually was. After the war against the dragons, Gwyn had a problem. The pygmy had created humanity, and humanity carried the dark soul, and the dark soul was the one thing in the universe that Gwyn genuinely did not know how to defeat. He could not simply kill all humans. There were too many, and killing them might have unintended consequences for the flame they were feeding through the dark sign. And besides, the pygmy had planned this. This was exactly the position the pygmy had intended to create. A world where humanity existed in too many fragments to simply eliminate. So Gwyn made a gift. The pygmy bloodline, the direct descendants of the furtive pygmy, who had preserved the most concentrated lineage of the dark soul, were given a city, the Ringed City. A beautiful, carefully maintained city at the edge of the world, with resources and structure and the trappings of civilization. They were given rulership, which made them the Pygmy Lords. And Gwyn gave them something else, his youngest daughter, Filianore, sent to live among them as a gesture of friendship and peace. A statue near the entrance to Filianore's church depicts this moment. Gwyn, kneeling before a figure, giving them a crown and the Chloranthy ring. The figure is hollow, their face is blank. They are being given gifts by a god, and in the way of gifts from gods, the gifts are not entirely what they appear to be. Filianore's presence in the Ringed City has a specific function. She sleeps. She has slept since before anyone can remember, and while she sleeps, she maintains an illusion. She keeps the Ringed City separated from the passage of time. She holds a bubble of preserved moment around the city and its people, so that when the rest of the world continues grinding through its cycles of fire and dark and collapse and renewal, the ringed city stays in the moment Gwyn left it. This is presented by Shira, the Knight of Filianor, who guards the princess's chamber as protection. Filianor keeps the city safe. She is the matriarch of the church there, the princess who lies in holy sleep for the sake of her people, and she should not be disturbed. But the ringed city hollow, the outcast figure you meet before going into the city proper, who urges you to wake Filianore, who clearly wants the illusion to end, sees it differently. He is the only person left in the ringed city who does not want to be preserved anymore. The pygmy lords inside the city have been sitting on their thrones for so long that their blood has dried. The dark soul that flows through their lineage has desiccated. They are ancient beyond any meaningful sense of the word, preserved in Filianor's stasis, unable to properly live or die, kept in place by a goddess's sleeping breath until someone comes along who needs the dark soul badly enough to extract it from them. Gwyn promised to come back for Filianor one day. He never did. He went into the kiln instead. The promise was the kind a god makes to a child he is sending somewhere he does not want to think about. Sincere in the moment and meaningless in practice. Because gods do not always come back, and promises made before the linking of the first fire are very old now and very far away. Slave Knight Gale arrives at the ringed city before you do. He comes with a specific purpose. He serves a painter who needs the blood of the dark soul to paint a new world. The previous painted world, Ariandel, is rotting and needs to burn, and from its ashes a new canvas will be prepared, and the painter needs the right pigment. Dark soul blood. Human darkness concentrated into its most essential form. Gale knows he is not strong enough to hold the dark soul. He knows consuming it will warp him and destroy him from the inside. He does it anyway, because the painter needs the pigment, and he has no one else to ask. He kills the pygmy lords, one by one, and drinks from their dried-up veins, and what he takes into himself begins to change him immediately. The dark miasma that swirls around the final boss version of Gale is the dark soul leaking out of him, seeping through the cracks that his inadequate vessel cannot contain. He waits for you at the end of everything, in a desert wasteland that used to be the ringed city, before Filianor awoke and the illusion dissolved and time caught up with everything at once. The ruins of Lothric and Anor Londo are visible in the distance, collapsed into each other in the way time collapses in this world when the fire is this close to going out. Everything is ash. Everything has already happened. The sky is the color of the last moment before dark, and Gale is there. Enormous now, feral, wearing a cape that moves like wings, wielding a great scythe of raw darkness, lost to what he consumed but still, somehow, waiting for you specifically. He needs to be defeated so the blood can be extracted, so the painter can paint, so there can be another world. This is what the ringed city was for. This is the end of the deal Gwyn made. The pygmy lords were kept in that stasis, preserved in that beautiful old city at the edge of everything. Not as a gift, but as a storage solution. The most concentrated lineage of the dark soul, kept safe, kept still, until someone needed it. Until a slave knight with a painter's mission came looking for pigment. The one pygmy lord who wanted the illusion to end was the only one who understood what the city really was. Not a sanctuary, a vault. Gwyn's vault, containing the one thing he could never simply destroy. The dark soul that humanity carried, kept contained in a dynasty of preserved kings who outlived their own blood. The painting that will be made from Gale's sacrifice will be cold and dark and gentle. Those are the painter's words. She wants a place where things can just be, without the cycle, without the fire and the dark and the linking and the hollowing. A small world inside a canvas, somewhere quiet. It is exactly what the painted world of Ariamis was supposed to be for Priscilla. The series ends, if you follow it all the way through, with someone making another painting, another small world inside a frame, another sanctuary built from the fragments of an age that is ending. Maybe that is the answer the series was always building toward. Not fire, not dark, not a dark lord or a lord of cinder, but a painting. A place where the cycle does not reach, somewhere you can put the fragile things when everything else is burning. Part 9. What linking the fire? actually does. There is a question that haunts every ending of the original Dark Souls in a way that the game almost refuses to address directly. When the chosen undead links the fire, when they walk into the kiln and sacrifice themselves to rekindle the first flame, perpetuating the age of fire for another 1,000 years. What exactly are they doing? The surface answer seems obvious. The fire is fading. Someone links it. It burns brighter. The world goes on. The undead curse, which exists because the fire is fading, is presumably relieved. Things continue. But nothing in the Dark Souls universe is that simple. Katie's testimony gives us the first complication. He says that Gwyn linking the fire was an act of resistance against nature, that the age of fire is not the natural state of the world, but a condition imposed on it, maintained through sacrifice, fighting against a tide that wants to go in a different direction. Linking the fire does not cure the undead curse. It restarts the cycle. It delays the inevitable for another revolution. The people who hollowed will eventually hollow again. The world will wear down again. New kingdoms will rise and fall and be ground into the dreg heap with all the others. And those who link the fire do not survive it unchanged. Gwyn linked the fire and became a hollow. The final boss of the game is not the Grand Lord of Sunlight who ruled the Age of Fire. It is the burned-out remnant of him, sitting in the kiln, attacking anything that enters because there is nothing left of him that knows how to do anything else. He has been sitting there for 1,000 years, alone, in the dark, at the place where he gave everything. The Lords of Cinder in Dark Souls 3 show the progression of this. As more and more beings link the fire over successive ages, the world accumulates more of the damage that each linking requires. The fire needs larger and larger sacrifices for smaller and smaller returns. By the time of Dark Souls 3, it has been linked so many times that the entire cycle is stuttering. The Lords of Cinder who should have remained on their thrones have fled them, unable to bear the weight of what they agreed to, and the world is collapsing because no one is maintaining the mechanism anymore. Yoel of Londor offers the player the chance to draw out their true strength through something called the Dark Sigil, a mark that accumulates in exchange for hollow levels. What the Dark Sigil represents is the dark sign being allowed to run in the other direction. Instead of suppressing the dark soul within you, it opens you to it. The more of it you accumulate, the more hollow you become in the technical sense, but also the stronger. As the dark soul that has been sealed inside you, your whole life finally starts to flow. The usurpation of fire ending, achieved by following Yoel and Yuria's questline to completion, involves taking the dark sigil to the fire and doing what the dark sign was always preventing, using the darkness within you as fuel rather than fighting it. You do not link the fire in the normal sense. You become a Lord of Hollows. The dark flame rises, and it is yours. And what it means for the world is left unspecified, but unquestionably different from anything that has come before. This ending is described by some of the characters involved as the age of the deep dark beginning. Yuria calls it the birth of the Lord of Hollows, and speaks of it with reverence. Whether this is the age of dark the pygmy intended, whether it is something better or worse, or simply different, the game does not say. It ends with the flame of your sigils burning, and everything after that is darkness. There is another ending, introduced in the Ringed City DLC, that gives the Firekeeper her eyes back, literal eyes that she was blinded to prevent her from seeing, removed from her to keep her from knowing the truth about what she was maintaining. With her eyes returned, the Firekeeper can see the ending that she was always kept from seeing, and she asks you, "Shall I show it to you? Shall I end this for you?" If you allow it, the fire fades, not violently, not catastrophically, just gently, in her hands, extinguished with care. She speaks of a world without fire, not with dread, but with something like quiet curiosity. Perhaps in the next age, she says something like this: humanity will find its own fire, not the fire of the first flame, not Gwyn's fire, something new, something humanity made itself, without gods, without the cycle, without the inherited machinery of sacrifice and linking and hollowing. It is the most hopeful ending in the series and also the most uncertain. We do not know what that world looks like. We have no guarantee that humanity will find its fire, but the Firekeeper does not seem afraid of the dark now that she can see it. Part 10. The Age of Dark. What would actually happen? The question every Dark Souls player eventually asks is the one Aldea formulates most clearly. If the fire goes out, truly goes out, not just diminishes until someone links it again, what happens? Everyone in the world of Dark Souls has an opinion about this. Kathy says it would be the age of men, the age of dark, humanity's natural inheritance. Something good, something right, something long overdue. The Way of White has spent its entire existence warning that the Age of Dark would be catastrophe, a return to the cold gray stillness of the Age of Ancients, but worse, because unlike the original gray stillness, it would have the memory of what was lost. The Abyss is the closest we get to seeing raw dark, untempered and uncontrolled, and the Abyss is terrible. It consumes, it corrupts, it dissolves the self, it turns people into wrong things. New Londo was flooded and sealed because the four kings fell to it, and the darkness that had infected them would have spread without containment. The entire tragedy of Oolacile demonstrates what happens when the dark surges without guidance. But scholars have argued for years that the Abyss is not the natural state of the dark soul. It is the dark soul under pressure, distorted by the dark sign, compressed and twisted by centuries of suppression. A spring does not flood a field when it flows naturally. It floods when it has been blocked and finally breaks through. The Abyss may not be what the Age of Dark looks like. It may be what the dark soul looks like when it has been denied its nature for 1,000 years and finally gives way. Aldea, who has spent an eternity trying to understand this, offers no conclusion. He says there are two options: to link the fire and continue the cycle, or to not link it and face the dark. He says both are equally problematic. He says the only way out is to face the truth without illusion and find a third path, something the series has always gestured toward without fully arriving at. The three games together seem to suggest that the third path is the one that several characters in Dark Souls 3 are quietly pursuing. Yoel and Yuria with their pilgrimage, guiding the unkindled toward a different kind of ending. The painter girl in the ashes of Ariandel, making her world not to preserve the old, but to create something new. The Fire Keeper, returning her sight and speaking of a different fire that humanity might kindle for itself. What would actually happen if the fire went out? We can only guess from fragments. The Untended Graves, that eerie dark mirror of Firelink Shrine, shows a version of the world that looks like the fire was never properly linked, a place where time stopped and the cold settled in and nothing moves except the shadows. It is not apocalyptic in the expected way. It is quiet, empty, cold. Champion Gundair waits there, wearing an Eudex Gundair poise, but never becoming the Eudex Gundair you fought at the start of the game. He arrived too late, the fire was already out, and all he can do now is occupy that dark shrine like a sentry at a gate that no longer exists. Whether this is humanity flourishing or humanity frozen is genuinely ambiguous. The Untended Graves are not full of suffering. They are full of nothing, an absence rather than a ruin, a world that never quite became what it was supposed to. Maybe that is the honest answer, not fire, not dark, but simply the quiet that happens after the question has been asked too many times, and no one has answered it. The world does not end with a great catastrophe or a great redemption. It just gets very cold and very still, and the bonfires go out one by one, and the last light is the one you carry. Part 11. The Primordial Serpents and the Game. Behind the game. None of the tragedy we have traveled through tonight would have happened the way it happened without two creatures who move through the whole story, like players manipulating a board from underneath the table. King Seeker Frampt and Darkstalker Kathe. The two primordial serpents. They are enormous, ancient. Their bodies are all that remains of what were once dragons, before the first flame arrived and transformed everything. They are among the last remnants of the Age of Ancients, imperfect descendants of the original everlasting dragons, who survived the war and the ages by adapting, by becoming something different, by finding their place in the new order rather than fighting it. Frampt lives in a crevice at Firelink Shrine. He greets you warmly. He calls you the Chosen. He tells you that your destiny is to link the fire, that you are the prophesied hero who will succeed Gwyn and perpetuate the Age of Fire, and he guides you with grandfatherly patience through the steps of that quest. He will eat items for you in exchange for souls. He speaks of Gwyn with reverence and of the fire with something approaching love. Katie lives in the abyss at the bottom of New Londo, accessible only after the four kings are defeated. He tells you the truth, or his version of the truth, about Gwyn's sin, about the dark soul, about what the pygmy planned and what the Age of Dark is supposed to be. He asks you to become the Dark Lord instead of linking the fire, to become the rightful ruler of humanity's inheritance. Here is what neither of them wants you to notice. They are both trying to use you. Frampt wants you to link the fire, because that is what he has aligned himself with. He served Gwyn, he mourned Gwyn. He is invested in the Age of Fire continuing, not because it is right, but because it is what he has always served. He tells you it is your destiny, because that framing makes you more likely to do what he wants. Kadi wants you to become the Dark Lord because he has positioned himself as the guide toward that outcome for an extremely long time. He is the serpent who convinced Oolacile to dig up Manus, or at least the one who fits the description of the serpent involved. He is the serpent who formed the Darkwraith Covenant, who guides those hunters of humanity toward taking the dark soul from others to accumulate power. His agenda may be the Pygmies' agenda, which is humanity's natural inheritance, which is something genuinely good. Or it may be something more personal, something a creature as ancient as Katie has developed over millennia of working toward a single goal. Neither serpent is lying exactly. Both of them are telling you the truth, filtered through the lens of what they want from you. Frampt omits the first sin. Katie omits the complications of the Age of Dark. They are not villains, but they are not your friends either. They are very old things with very long plans, and you are their best current opportunity to advance those plans. This is perhaps the deepest mystery in the series, not who the furtive pygmy was, or what the Age of Dark looks like, but whether there is any perspective available to you that is not serving someone else's agenda. The game gives you the choice between two options that two ancient beings have been carefully preparing and positioning toward. Is there a third option? Is there a way to understand the situation that neither serpent offers? Aldrich suggests there might be. He says the answer does not lie in the fire or the dark, but in our own eyes. But Aldrich is himself a creature transformed beyond recognition by his own searching. He gave up his human body in pursuit of answers and became something that floats and burns and is not sure anymore what it is. His perspective is the most complete available and also the most alienated from what it means to be the person standing at the fork in the road. You can ignore both serpents entirely in the original game. You can link the fire without Frampt's blessing or refuse to become Dark Lord without ever meeting Kata. The game accommodates all of these choices without changing the essential problem they address. The fire fades, the dark comes, and two ancient serpents have been waiting for you to make a choice that they believe they understand better than you do. Whether they are right is the question. Part 12. The Final Question and the Dying Fire. It is very late now, or very early, depending on how you think about time. The kind of hour when the world goes still and the questions that are too large to carry during the day become possible to hold. When the distance between you and ancient stone halls feels smaller somehow, when the idea of a flame that has been burning since before history makes a kind of sense it does not quite make in the afternoon. Dark Souls is a game about cycles, about the way things repeat, about how the same mistakes look different enough in each new age that the people making them believe they are doing something new, something better, something that will finally break the pattern. Gwyn made his mistake. The kingdoms that came after him made theirs. Every lord who linked the fire thought perhaps this time it would hold. Every generation of undead who hollowed had not intended to. Every hunter who carried their burden into the night. Every scholar who sought knowledge that cost them their self. Every ordinary person who just wanted the blood ministration to heal and not to curse. They all thought they would be the exception. The fire does not care about exceptions. The dark does not care about your intentions. The wheel turns because wheels turn, and the only variables are what you choose to do while you are riding it. What the lore of this world leaves you with, if you have followed it all the way down, is not answers. It is a specific kind of company. The understanding that the questions you carry, about what is worth sacrificing, about how much of yourself you can give away and remain yourself, about whether hope is wisdom or delusion when the evidence is this equivocal. These questions are old, older than kingdoms, older than fire. The people who came before you carried them too, and they did not solve them, but they lived with them, and some of them made something beautiful in the living. A painted world in a cold winter. A woman who stayed to keep the lights on. A firstborn son who found a dragon worth loving. A slave knight who carried a painter's quest to the end of everything so that something new could begin. The fire fades. That is the nature of fire. Everything bright eventually goes dim, but the questions it illuminated do not go with it. They persist in the dark, patient and quiet, the way all the deepest things do, waiting for the next person who will carry a torch through ruins and stop for a moment to look at what the light reveals. That is all exploring ever is, really, being willing to hold a light up in a dark place and see what was there all along. Rest now. Let the weight go. Let the stone corridors and the dying embers and the question of who the furtive pygmy really was dissolve into the comfortable dark behind your eyes. Whatever dreams come, let them be gentle. The hunt can wait. The fire can wait. The age of whatever comes next can wait until morning. You were here for this. That is enough. If you made it this far, whether you are still awake and want to talk about these mysteries, or whether these words found you somewhere between consciousness and sleep, I am glad you were here. If any of these threads caught on something in you, leave a comment below. This community makes these deep dives worth doing, and your thoughts about the Lord genuinely shape where I take things next. If you have not subscribed yet, consider doing it. It helps more than you might realize, and it means the next time you need something long and quiet to settle into, there will be something waiting for you. Until then, may the good fire guide your way. Sleep well. End of script, Part 13, Gravelord Nito and the Quiet God. There is a god in the original Dark Souls who never appeared in any of the sequels. No mention, no legacy covenant, no ancient ruins bearing his name. He simply ceased to matter to the story once the first game concluded, and the games that came after seemed to agree by collective silence that whatever Nito represented had said its piece. His name is Gravelord Nito, and he is the first of the dead. When you encounter him at the bottom of the Tomb of the Giants, an oppressively dark place that is already challenging before you add a Lord Soulbearer into the equation, the effect is genuinely striking. You drop into a cavern, and there he is, enormous, slow, swathed in a black miasma, his body a massive central skeleton with dozens of smaller skeletal forms, packed into and around his ribcage, arms dangling off him, skulls nested into his torso, like ornaments. He is not a skeleton wearing dead things. He is a skeleton made of dead things, an accumulation of endings given form and made ambulatory. He is also, of all the major bosses in the original Dark Souls, the one with the least explored backstory. Gwyn has his motivations unpacked across 3 games. The Witch of Izalith's tragedy is evident in every demon that spawns from Lost Izalith's chaos flame. The furtive pygmy's legacy structures the entire series. But Nito found his soul, helped defeat the dragons by spreading a miasma of death and disease across them, and then went underground. He stayed underground. He has been down there since, sleeping in his coffin, administering death to all life, giving away pieces of his Lord's soul to fund the cause of mortality itself. That last part is genuinely fascinating. Nito is described as having offered much of the energy of his own soul to death. He is the god of death who willingly depletes his own power in service of the function he embodies. He is not hoarding his Lord's soul or using it to maintain dominion. He is spending it, converting it into the mechanism of mortality that keeps the world turning. Without Nito, the description implies, death might not function properly. The great wheel of living and dying that the first flame requires to keep burning would not turn. This raises a question that the game gestures toward without addressing. If Nito is constantly giving away his Lord's soul to sustain death, what happens to him over time? Is the version you fight already deeply diminished? A fraction of what he was when the Age of Fire began. The fact that his Lord's soul is described as powerful despite all that energy already having been spent suggests either that the dark soul of the dead was incomprehensibly vast to begin with, or that death itself feeds back into him, or that the accounting of Lord's soul power simply does not work the way you expect it to. And then there is the question of what death actually is in this world. In the Age of Ancients before the First Flame, there was no death. The dragons were immortal, and the gray formless world they inhabited had no concept of endings. Death arrived with the fire, as part of disparity, a counterpart to life. But death in the Dark Souls universe is not simply cessation. The undead curse demonstrates this clearly. People who die keep coming back. They cannot die properly, permanently, because the fire is fading, and the mechanism that maintains mortality is weakening. Nito's role is not just to be death. It is to maintain the concept of death, to administer it, to ensure that the great cycle of the first flame, life burning up, dying, returning as fuel for the flame, keeps functioning. When the undead curse spreads, it is not just a personal tragedy for the individuals afflicted. It is a sign that Nito's mechanism is failing, that the fire is no longer strong enough to sustain what death requires to work properly. This makes Nito not an antagonist in any moral sense, but a maintenance worker for a cosmic infrastructure. He keeps the death engine running. He does this alone, in the dark, deep underground, with an army of skeletons as his only companions and travelers who are brave or foolish enough to find their way to his tomb as his only visitors. There is a coffin next to his own great coffin in his boss chamber, smaller than his, which itself is large enough to hold a creature of his enormous frame. Nobody knows what it is for. It has a size that suggests either a human or a smaller being could occupy it. It is just there, beside the first of the dead, unexplained. A second coffin in a room that seems to be a private sanctuary at the end of an enormous necropolis. Who was it for? Did Nito have someone he cared about once? A companion or a fellow traveler who shared his early days before the Age of Fire? Someone he buried and then stayed beside, administering death endlessly, keeping the tomb as a kind of memorial. The game will not tell you. It just shows you the coffin and trusts you to sit with the question. Nito is absent from the broader story of Dark Souls in a way that feels meaningful. He did not try to stop the undead curse. He did not flee his tomb when the world fell apart. He did not send servants to link the fire or prevent the dark. He just kept doing what he was doing, administering death, spending his soul on the mechanism, waiting in his tomb for whatever came next. In a story full of gods and kings who could not accept the natural order, who fought and manipulated and sacrificed everything to hold on to the Age of Fire or reshape it in their image, Nito alone seems to have simply continued being what he was, the god of death, keeping death going for as long as it could be kept going. There is something almost noble in that, or at least something that looks nothing like the corruption and fear and desperate control that defines everyone else's story. He just stayed in the dark and did the work. Part 14. Velka and the Goddess Nobody Sees. In the original Dark Souls, you can find something called a Book of the Guilty in the Graveyard near the entrance to the catacombs. It tracks the names of all the sinners in the online world, players who have committed sins against various covenants, against NPCs, against the game's social order. It is maintained and watched by a goddess. That goddess is Velka, and she is never seen. Velka, the goddess of sin, is one of the most influential figures in the cosmology of the original Dark Souls and one of the most deliberately absent. She is referenced in dozens of item descriptions. Her crows are everywhere. The giant crow that carries you to Lordran from the Northern Undead Asylum, the Corvian creatures in the Painted World of Ariandel, and its relationship to the bird-shaped worshippers. All of them trace back to Velka in one way or another. Her name appears on items and armor sets. Her servants can be found in Undeadburg. The Book of the Guilty exists because of her, but she herself never appears. Not as a boss, not as an NPC, not even as a corpse with a revealing set of clothing. She is exclusively a presence felt through the things she oversees and the creatures in her service. What we know about Velka is this. She is a goddess of sin who judges both gods and men. That second part is what makes her unusual among the deities of Anor Londo. The other gods judge humans. They set up rules and punish humans for breaking them. Velka judges everyone equally. The gods are no more immune to her accounting than the people they rule. This is, in the context of Dark Souls' lore about Gwyn's sins and the corruption of the Age of Fire, a genuinely threatening proposition. A goddess who tracks sins equally regardless of who commits them, who maintains a book of the guilty that does not make exceptions for lords. She would have a very thick file on Gwyn, on the Witch of Izalith, on the healing church that burns cities, on every king who went to war with another people for reasons that look better with time smoothed over them. The theory that has the most traction, and which the lore supports to a considerable degree, is that Velka was involved in setting the chosen undead's journey in motion. Not Frampt, not Cathay, but Velka. The giant crow that carries you from the northern undead asylum to Lordran is not a random bird. Giant crows are symbols of Velka throughout the game. They are her messengers, her servants, her eyes in the world outside whatever domain she keeps herself in. If Velka sent the crow, then she was watching. She knew what was coming. She judged the sins of the Age of Fire and determined that it was time for a reckoning, and she placed her piece on the board. One undead, dropped into Lordran with nothing but a broken sword and the seeds of a prophecy. And let the consequences unfold. Gwendolyn's Darkmoon Covenant in this reading was a direct counter to Velka's long game. Gwendolyn's task was to hunt sinners and execute the prophecy of the chosen undead on Gwyn's terms, to route the power of the undead toward linking the fire, rather than toward whatever accounting Velka had been keeping. The crow demons in the painted world that Gwendolyn's Darkmoon blades kill for their souvenirs of reprisal are specifically Velka's followers. Gwendolyn sent hunters into the painted world to kill Velka's people, two divine institutions in direct conflict, using the undead as their instruments. The pardoner Oswald of Karim, who sells absolution from sin in the undead parish, works in Velka's name. When Gwendolyn is killed and his Darkmoon Covenant ends, Oswald responds with something that sounds almost like satisfaction. Not regret for the death of a god, but a kind of recognition that justice, or at least some form of accounting, has been served. Velka's servant watches the leader of the rival divine order die, and does not mourn. Where is Velka herself? Some players have proposed that she exists within the painted world, that the painted world of Ariamis, with all its Velka-connected inhabitants, is actually her domain, as much as Priscilla's refuge. Others suggest she exists outside the conventional cosmology of fire and dark entirely, watching from some remove that the game's mechanics cannot reach. The most unsettling possibility is that she has already done everything she needed to do, that the entire sequence of events you participate in as the chosen undead, or the bearer of the curse or the Ashen One was, in some sense, her design. The goddess of sin does not need to appear personally to execute justice. She just needs to ensure the guilty are confronted with the consequences of their choices. Gwyn feared the Age of Dark. He spent everything trying to delay it. He cursed humanity, burned the people he should have protected, sacrificed generations of undead to keep his fire going. Velka kept the books. Whatever verdict her accounting reaches, it has been building since before any of the kingdoms we explore in these games had names. Part 15, The Four Kings and What New Londo actually was. New Londo Ruins sits at the very bottom of the elevator shaft beneath Firelink Shrine. It is flooded, the water is black and still, and the buildings that rise from it, grand, vaulted, archways decorated with careful stonework, have the quality of something that was once genuinely beautiful and is now preserved in its ruination by the water that destroyed it. New Londo was one of Lordran's most important cities, a center of government, of commerce, of human civilization at its height. It was given to the Four Kings, four human lords of exceptional power, to whom Gwyn had bequeathed a fragment of his own lord's soul as a gesture of recognition. This was an unusual act on Gwyn's part. Giving a portion of a lord's soul to humans, to mortal beings, it represented a degree of trust or recognition that the gods did not typically extend. The Four Kings used this fragment well, for a time. They built New Londo into something impressive. They ruled justly by the standards of the world they inhabited. They were powerful, and they were respected. And then the Dark Wraiths came. The Dark Wraiths are not simple monsters in the lore. They are humans who made a covenant, with Keitha, presumably, or with the forces aligned with the Dark, to become hunters of humanity. They drain humanity from others using special gauntlets, collecting the dark substance that every human carries inside them. The description of this covenant is bleak and specific. They drain the humanity from the living to collect it for their Dark Lord, whose identity shifts depending on which part of the story you are reading. Kadi is implied to have brought the Dark Wraith Covenant to New Londo. The Four Kings, whose power came from a fragment of the Lord's soul of sunlight, were seduced by the promises of the alternative, more power. the ability to transcend the limitations that even a fragment of godhood could not fully remove. The abyss whispering up from below, offering something that the piece of Gwyn's soul could not provide. They accepted. The dark wraiths spread through New Londo like a tide. The humans there were drained of their humanity, hollowed in a very specific sense, their inner darkness extracted rather than simply suppressed. The city became a place of predation, of darkness feeding on darkness, of the abyss spreading through the streets in a way that made the undead curse look gentle by comparison. The other gods of Anor Londo made the call that they had to make. They could not simply watch. They could not allow the abyss to spread beyond New Londo's walls and consume Lordran. So, 3 sealers came, clerics of great power, who had developed a specific dark miracle designed for exactly this eventuality. They sealed New Londo. They drowned it. They flooded the entire city, killing everyone inside, the guilty and the innocent both. And then the sealers returned to the ruins and waited. The seal had to be maintained by their presence. They could not leave. They stayed there for 1,000 years, the last remnants of what had been done. You find one of them, just one. Ingrid is still there when you arrive at New Londo, crouching on a rampart above the black water, wearing ancient robes, watching the seal he helped create. He is not hollow. He is not mad. He is simply there, completing a sentence that began 1,000 years ago and has not ended yet. He will give you the key to the seal if you have the right item or the right number of souls. He will let you drain the city so you can descend and face the 4 kings. And when he does, there is something in his manner. Not relief exactly, but acceptance. The ending has been pending for centuries. Someone has finally arrived who can finish it. The 4 kings themselves, when you fight them, are barely there. They emerge from darkness as shapes rather than beings. Vaguely human, vast, trailing darkness behind them, like robes or like wounds. They are not what they were. They are what the abyss made of them after they accepted the Dark Wraith Covenant. Beings of pure desire and hunger. The fragment of Gwyn's Lord's soul that once made them rulers of a city, now a core of fire inside something that has been entirely consumed by dark. They hit hard. They drain your health with every successful attack, mimicking in mechanical terms what they did to their own people. They are the undead curse made personal. Not just an impersonal tragedy spreading through a population, but 4 specific powerful beings who made a specific choice and became the embodiment of its consequences. What was the fragment of Gwyn's Lord's soul that he gave them? What did it feel like to carry a piece of the Lord of Sunlight's power inside you, to wield it and build with it and be recognized by the gods for it? And what did it feel like when Kathi arrived, whispering about what the abyss could offer instead, and the fragment of fire you carried felt insufficient against the promise of something darker and more complete? We do not know what the 4 kings thought, because they cannot tell us anymore. They are too far gone. The darkness has consumed whatever perspective they once had. They can only reach and drain and fall and eventually die, giving up the Lord's soul shard that Gwyn once trusted them to hold. New Londo is one of the places in Dark Souls that tells you very directly what the abyss actually does to humans when it gets inside them. Not the dramatic transformation of Manus, not the external corruption of Oolacile's citizens, the quiet kind. The kind where someone powerful and recognized and trusted is offered something better and accepts, and slowly becomes the thing they accepted rather than the person who accepted it. The city is still beautiful under the water. The architecture is still visible if you look through the black surface. Arches and corridors, and what might have been plazas, places where people gathered for ordinary reasons, lived ordinary lives inside the extraordinary machinery of a city granted to them by a god. Ingrid waited 1,000 years to give someone the key. The 4 kings waited in darkness for someone to put them out of their misery. Part 16. Seath the Scaleless and the Dragon that betrayed everything among all the characters in the Dark Souls universe whose choices set catastrophes in motion. Seath the Scaleless occupies a particular kind of terrible space. He is a villain. That much is clear. He kidnaps people and vivisects them in the Duke's archives, conducting experiments that the game leaves deliberately vague in terms of their full extent, but which produce the crystal golems, the channelers, and potentially Priscilla herself, if the theory about her parentage holds up. He is obsessive, paranoid, brilliant in a way that has curdled into something genuinely dangerous. But he is also, on some level, the most sympathetic figure in the world. He is a dragon who was born without the scales that made the other dragons immortal. In a world where all his kin were eternal stone, he was born mortal. He was born wrong, different, lacking the essential thing that defined his species. The dragons who were patient and immortal, and who had never needed anything from anyone, presumably had no framework for what to do with a member of their species who would age and die. He was rejected by his own kind, made insufficient by nature, and then the gods came, with their fire and their disparity, and offered him something, not the immortality he lacked, but something close enough. Recognition, power, a place. Seath helped Gwyn defeat the dragons, his own species, his own kin, in exchange for a title and the First Flame's boon of near immortality, which was called the Pale Tongue and granted through a crystal soul. This is framed in the game as treachery. Seath betrayed the dragons. That is the official Anor Londo position, and it is not wrong. He did betray them. He handed the secrets of their immortality to their enemies, and those enemies used the knowledge to kill them. Whatever the politics of the war, whatever the justifications on either side, the practical fact is that Seath's cooperation ended a civilization, but the framework of betrayal assumes he owed the dragons something, and the dragons, from what we can understand of them, had never given him anything. They had not protected him, or provided for him, or even acknowledged his deficiency with anything beyond exclusion. He was born without the thing that made them what they were, and he was born among beings who had no capacity for the kind of complicated solidarity that would require them to adapt their world to include him. He chose fire over stone. He chose the beings who had room for him over the beings who did not. The tragedy is not that he was wrong to do this. The tragedy is what he became afterward. The immortality Gwyn gave him was not the immortality he craved. It was functional, but not the deep crystalline permanence of scales that the other dragons had possessed. So, Seath spent the rest of his existence in the Duke's archives trying to replicate what he had been born without, experimenting, studying, cutting open living things to find the principle of immortality inside them. His obsession with the primordial crystal, the great crystal that sits in his archive and spreads crystalline growth across everything it touches, reflects his ceaseless attempt to find a stable substitute for what nature denied him. He lost his mind somewhere in the centuries. You encounter him first in an unavoidable ambush. The first time you reach his archives, he attacks you from the crystal, kills you, and you wake up in a prison cell. The game uses this moment not as a cheap death, but as a statement. You cannot simply walk into Seath's presence and fight him. He will not fight fairly. He cannot fight fairly, because fairness requires the kind of stable, secure identity that Seath has not had since before the Age of Fire began. When you finally face him properly, he is thrashing and consuming himself as much as his environment, extending the primordial crystal outward in expanding tendrils, unable to stop. He is brilliant, and he is broken, and he is trying to hold himself together through the compulsive mechanism of study and experiment that has replaced whatever relationship with the world he once had. If Priscilla is his daughter, as the evidence suggests, then his experiments produced at least one result that was genuinely alive in a way that was more than just a subject. Something with her own perspective, her own capacity for gentleness, her own small world of painted snow. He may not have intended that. He may not have known. Or he may have known and not known what to do with it, because Seath had long since lost the ability to relate to the things he created as anything other than data points in an ongoing inquiry. There is a crystal cave beyond the archives where he has his final lair, and before you reach him, you walk across invisible floor. Crystal formations that are there but transparent, solid ground you cannot see. It is one of the more disconcerting parts of the game, walking carefully across nothing, trusting that the floor is present even when you cannot confirm it. It is also, in retrospect, the most accurate description of Seath's relationship with reality. Everything beneath him that he stands on is real but not visible, present but not acknowledged, because the only thing he ever sees is what he is searching for. He was looking for his scales. He spent the entire Age of Fire looking for his scales. He never found them. Part 17. The Dreg Heap and the End of Everything. There is a place in Dark Souls 3 called the Dreg Heap. and it is where history goes to be compressed. When the Age of Fire has been sustained long enough, when enough cycles of linking and fading and linking again have passed, the accumulated weight of all those ages presses together. Kingdoms that existed in different eras, built on the ruins of previous kingdoms, collapse into a single location under the pressure of time. The Dreg Heap is the bottom of all of that, the deposit of everything that has fallen from the cycles above, all the architecture and all the bodies and all the artifacts of 1,000 years of recorded history collapsed into a kind of physical archive of endings. You fall into it. You descend through layers of accumulated ruin that were once ringed city outskirts and earthen peak, and the foundations of structures you might recognize from earlier games, all of them compacted together and tilted at wrong angles, simultaneously present in a space that should not be able to contain all of them. The Dreg Heap is the game's most direct visual representation of what time does in this universe when the fire keeps getting linked. It does not simply continue, it collapses inward. History becomes geology, layers pressing down on layers, with the oldest at the bottom and the most recent at the top, and everything in between gradually losing its distinction. By the time of the Ringed City DLC, the world has been cycling for so long that even this compressed ruin is past its use. The Ashen One has already defeated the Soul of Cinder, and returned the lords to their thrones, and arguably ended the last viable cycle of linking. What comes after the Dreg Heap is not another kingdom waiting to be explored. What comes after is the Ringed City, the last city, the one at the edge of everything, where the pygmy lords have been sitting in their preserved pocket of time, while the rest of creation unraveled around them. The Dreg Heap has an atmosphere that is hard to describe precisely. It should be bleak. It is all ruins, all collapse, all the debris of civilizations that destroyed themselves pursuing the same cycle. But there is something almost peaceful in it, almost the angels that circle above it, extending their grace downward in beams that will kill you if you stand in them, are described as seekers of the divine who transcended their human forms in the pursuit of the archdragon's wisdom. They are terrible and they kill you, but they are also, in their way, sincere. They found something they believed in and transformed themselves for it. That is the Dreg Heap's theme, in miniature. Everything here found something it believed in. And the belief was not enough, and the fire faded, and the kingdoms fell, and what remains is the honest record of all that sincerity deposited at the bottom of an era. The game ends here, in the sense that what comes after the Dreg Heap is genuinely the end of everything in the series. The Ringed City is the last location. Gale's Arena is the last boss. The blood of the Dark Soul, carried forward by a slave knight who loved a painter, is the last inheritance. And after that, there is a painting being made somewhere, cold and dark and gentle, waiting to be a new beginning, or simply a place where things can exist without the weight of all this history pressing down on them. The Dreg Heap is the answer to what the world of Dark Souls looks like when you wait long enough. Not apocalyptic, not dramatic, just compressed, layered. Everything that ever mattered stacked on top of everything else that ever mattered, with no hierarchy between them anymore, just presence. All those kingdoms, all those kings, all that fire, all of it eventually becomes geology. Part 18. Aldia's question and the only honest answer in the series. Dark Souls 2 is a controversial entry in the series. Players debate whether it fits the tone, whether its lore connects properly, whether the world building has the same coherence as the original. But there is one character in that game who says things that the entire series has been building toward without managing to articulate. Aldia, scholar of the first sin. Aldia is Vendrick's older brother, the scholar to Vendrick's king, the thinker to Vendrick's fighter. While Vendrick was building his kingdom and going to war against the giants at Nashandra's urging, Aldia was in his keep conducting experiments. He wanted to understand the cycle. He wanted to find a way out of it, not just delay it, not just redirect it, but genuinely escape the repetition of fire and dark and linking and hollowing that had consumed every civilization since the Age of Fire began. His experiments were extreme. He kept giants in his manor and subjected them to procedures the game declines to detail, in the hope of understanding their connection to the draconic essence. He eventually went further, went far enough that he subjected himself to his own experiments, dissolved his human form entirely, became the scholar of the first sin in both name and nature. He is encountered at various points in the game as a moving thing in a burning cage, then as a presence that offers cryptic dialogue, and finally as a burning, formless entity that floats and speaks and challenges you if you have met certain conditions. He has no answers. He is explicit about this. What Aldea offers instead is the clearest articulation in the series of what the problem actually is. The first sin, in his framing, is not Gwyn's sacrifice or the dark sign or any particular act of cruelty. The first sin is the linking of the fire itself, the decision to sustain an artificial condition, the age of fire, beyond its natural span. The choice to use human beings as fuel rather than let the natural order turn. Everything that comes after, the undead curse, the dark sign, the hollowing, all the kingdoms that grind themselves up in the service of the flame, all of it flows from that original decision. But here is where Aldea's wisdom reaches its limit and where he is honest about that limit. He does not know what the alternative looks like. He has spent centuries trying to understand whether there is a path that does not lead back to fire or to the uncontrolled dark that the fire suppresses. He has not found one. He has found only that the path everyone has been taking is wrong, and that knowing it is wrong is not the same as knowing the right path. He asks you, is there a third way? He does not know. He is asking sincerely. That question is the most important thing any character in the series says, because the entire logic of the game, the covenants, the endings, the choices offered to you, is organized around two options: link the fire or let it die. Extend the Age of Fire one more time, at whatever cost, or allow the Age of Dark to begin, whatever that actually means. Two paths defined by two ancient beings with their own agendas, presented to you as though they represent the complete range of possibility. Aldea says they might not. The Firekeeper ending of Dark Souls 3, where you give her eyes and let the fire fade gently, where she speaks of a different kind of fire that humanity might find for itself. That is the closest the series comes to answering Aldea's question. Not fire maintained by sacrifice. Not the raw dark of an uncontrolled Age of Dark. Something else? Something small and human and made from within, rather than inherited from a flame that was always at its core someone else's. The series does not confirm whether this works. It ends with a gesture toward possibility, not a map of the route. Aldea would probably find that honest. He spent centuries looking for an answer he never found, and by the time you encounter him, he has made peace with the not knowing. He is still burning. He is still present. He is still asking. He did not stop because the question was difficult. That might be the truest thing the series offers about how to exist in a world where the big questions do not have clean answers, not resolution, not resignation. Just the continued presence of the question and the willingness to keep looking and the honesty to admit when you do not know. Part 19. What the bonfires are. The real answer. You rest at bonfires throughout the entire Dark Souls series without the game ever fully explaining what they are. You know the mechanics, you heal, you level up, your enemies respawn, the Estus flask refills. You become a little safer in a world that is relentlessly unsafe, for a moment, before you push on. But what are they? The item descriptions around bonfires are careful and specific. Bonfires are fueled by the bones of the undead. The kindling system, which Pinwheel stole from Nito and which can be used to increase Estus charges, involves adding more undead bone fuel to the fire. The firekeepers who maintain bonfires are physically, grotesquely altered by their proximity to these flames. Their description talks about an excess of humanity deforming their bodies, which suggests that a bonfire is not simply a fire, but something more specifically tied to the dark soul. Here is the theory that the community has developed, and that the game supports piece by piece without ever confirming outright. The bonfires are fragments of the first flame, distributed across the world by Gwyn, or by the structure of the linking itself. They are tiny versions of the thing that started everything, small flames fed by human souls, rather than the grand and terrible first flame fed by Lord souls. And they serve a double purpose. First, they maintain the mechanism of the undead curse. When you die and wake up at a bonfire, that is not just a convenient game mechanic. It is the dark sign doing what Gwyn designed it to do, Your soul is returned from death, stripped of whatever it accumulated, sent back to the last station in the network. The bonfires are the infrastructure of the curse. They are the system that ensures the undead keep trying, keep dying, keep burning up in service of something larger. Second, they consume. Every time you kindle a bonfire, every time you rest at one, every time the undead curse sends you back to one, the fire gets a little more fuel. The network of bonfires across the world is collectively feeding the first flame, sustaining it through the accumulation of what the undead lose in death. This is what the dark sign was designed to accomplish, not just to weaken humans, but to harvest them, to make every death a small offering that sustains the age Gwyn chose to preserve. This reading makes the bonfire one of the series' most brilliant pieces of design, a thing that feels like mercy and functions like extraction. You are grateful for the bonfire when you find one. It is safety in a dangerous world. It is the moment the tension releases, the breath you take before going forward again. And all of that relief is also the moment the fire takes a little more from you. The fire keepers, who tend the bonfires and are deformed by their proximity to them, are not simply caretakers. They are sacrifices of a different kind. They have poured so much of their humanity into the flames they maintain that it has reshaped them entirely. They are no longer people the way they were before they took the vow. They are the human face of the system, the interface between the undead and the flame that needs feeding. This is why killing a firekeeper destroys the bonfire she tended, not just metaphorically, mechanically. Her Estes soul can be used to upgrade your flask, which means taking something she gave to the flame and redirecting it toward your own survival. And in Dark Souls 3, the firekeeper's eyes, hidden from her, removed from her, contain the memory of what the world looks like without the fire. Returning those eyes to her is what enables the ending where the fire fades gently, by the hands of someone who has been tending it her whole life and finally gets to see what she has been maintaining. The bonfires light the way, they warm you, they restore you. They are also the finest example in the series of something that helps you and uses you at the same time. Comfort and consumption, presence and extraction. The warmth of a small fire in a very cold world that is also the mechanism of the very coldness around you. Rest at a bonfire. Let the light flicker. Let the tension leave your body. The fire is always hungry. But for a moment, in this light, you are warm. Conclusion. The questions that stay lit. It is very late now, or very early, depending on how you think about time. The kind of hour when the world goes still, and the questions that are too large to carry during the day become possible to hold. When the distance between you and ancient stone halls feels smaller somehow. When the idea of a flame that has been burning since before history makes a kind of sense it does not quite make in the afternoon. Dark Souls is a game about cycles, about the way things repeat, about how the same mistakes look different enough in each new age that the people making them believe they are doing something new, something better, something that will finally break the pattern. Gwyn made his mistake. The kingdoms that came after him made theirs. Every lord who linked the fire thought perhaps this time it would hold. Every generation of undead who hollowed had not intended to. Every scholar who carried their burden into the dark. Every king who crossed an ocean because a beautiful woman told him there was a threat that had to be met. Every ordinary person who just wanted one more day of warmth before the cold came back. They all thought they would be the exception. The fire does not care about exceptions. The dark does not care about your intentions. The wheel turns because wheels turn, and the only variables are what you choose to do while you are riding it. What the lore of this world leaves you with, if you have followed it all the way down, is not answers. It is a specific kind of company. The understanding that the questions you carry, about what is worth sacrificing, about how much of yourself you can give away and remain yourself, about whether hope is wisdom or delusion when the evidence is this equivocal. These questions are old, older than kingdoms, older than fire. The people who came before you carried them too, and they did not solve them, but they lived with them, and some of them made something beautiful in the living, a painted world in a cold winter, a woman who stayed to keep the lights on, a firstborn son who found a dragon worth loving, a god of death who kept giving his power away because the work required it, a goddess with a book full of names, a slave knight who carried a painter's quest to the end of everything so that something new could begin. The fire fades. That is the nature of fire. Everything bright eventually goes dim, but the questions it illuminated do not go with it. They persist in the dark, patient and quiet, the way all the deepest things do, waiting for the next person who will carry a torch through ruins and stop for a moment to look at what the light reveals. That is all exploring ever is, really. Being willing to hold a light up in a dark place and see what was there all along. You were here tonight, in the quiet, while the world outside went still. You followed these questions through ancient ruins and dying kingdoms, and the private griefs of gods who did not know how to let go. That took something, even in the restful form of listening, even half asleep, following the thread. That counts. Rest now. Let the weight go. Let the stone corridors and the dying embers and the question of who the furtive pygmy really was dissolve into the comfortable dark behind your eyes. Whatever dreams come, let them be gentle and strange in the way that good dreams sometimes are, full of old stone and firelight and the specific peace of a bonfire in a difficult place. The hunt can wait. The fire can wait. The age of whatever comes next can wait until morning. You were here for this. That is enough. If you made it this far, whether you are still awake and want to talk about these mysteries, or whether these words found you somewhere between consciousness and sleep, I am genuinely glad you were here. These long explorations exist because there is something worth sitting with in these worlds, something that rewards the patience of following a thread into the dark. If any of these theories caught on something in you, if there is a mystery you wanted more of, or a thread I missed, leave a comment. This community makes these videos worth making, and your thoughts genuinely shape where these stories go. If you have not subscribed yet, consider doing it. It means more than you might realize, and it ensures that the next time you need something long and quiet to settle into, there will be something waiting. Until then, may the good fire guide your way. Sleep well. End of script. Addendum. Time, memory, and the unreliable world. There is one more thing worth talking about before the fire goes fully out, and it is something that does not get discussed enough in lore breakdowns because it is not about any particular character or location. It is about the nature of the world itself, and specifically about how the Dark Souls series handles the passage of time. The opening of Dark Souls 3 shows you something remarkable. The unkindled rise from their graves at the sound of bells, called back to the world to retrieve the Lords of Cinder and re-establish the ritual of linking. The graves they rise from are in Lothric, the current kingdom. But when you explore Lothric, you find remnants of places that should not be present. The architecture of kingdoms that preceded it, compressed together, layered into the current world like sediment. You walk through a place and something catches your eye, a design element, a specific type of stonework, an item description that places the object centuries earlier than the kingdom around it. The series has always done this, but it becomes most explicit in 3 and in the DLCs. Irithyll of the Boreal Valley occupies the same geographic space as Anor Londo, and both cities exist simultaneously in a sense. One in the past, one in the present, connected by the same great cathedral that persists through both eras. When you descend from Irithyll's frozen streets into what you realize is the foundation of Anor Londo, you are not traveling backward in time. You are discovering that the past is still physically present, just buried under the buildings that came after it. The game uses this as narrative rather than just architecture. Memories in Dark Souls 2, accessed through the Ashen Mist Heart, are not abstractions or simulations. You physically enter the past, literally stepping into the preserved consciousness of a dead giant and walking through the last moments of a war that ended generations ago. The battles are still happening in there. The soldiers are still dying. Time in this world is not a river that flows forward and leaves the past behind. It is more like a material, thick, sedimentary, with the old layers still present and accessible to those who know how to reach them. This matters for understanding the mysteries we have been exploring tonight, because it means that the past in Dark Souls is not simply inference and item description. It is somewhere you can go. It is a place that has physical reality, that can be visited, that has inhabitants who are still acting out the moments of their deaths, because those moments are still happening in some preserved layer of the world. Gwyn's sacrifice is still burning somewhere, in that sense. Artorias is still losing to Manus. In some layer you could theoretically reach if you had the right key. The people of Oolacile are still being consumed by the abyss, their tragedy ongoing in whatever stratum of temporal material they occupy. This also means that when the Ringed City DLC shows you a world at the literal end of time, a desert wasteland where the ruins of Lothric and Anor Londo can be seen collapsed in the distance, you are not just seeing the future, you are seeing one layer of time that is being revealed as the layers above it burn away. The Ringed City, preserved by Filianor's sleep, was always there. The desert was always the eventual resting state of all those kingdoms. The illusion that Filianor maintained was not a lie about what the city was. It was a protection against the world, seeing what it would become. When you wake her, time catches up. Not because the future arrives, but because the preserved present dissolves, and what was always underneath becomes visible. The lore scholars who have spent years with these games return to this quality again and again. The world of Dark Souls is not just a setting for the events of the story. It is itself a kind of text, layered, palimpsestic, with older meanings visible through newer ones, with the logic of the whole structure organized around the premise that nothing truly ends. It just goes underground. It just becomes part of the foundation. That is also why the mysteries stay alive the way they do. Answers to these questions exist somewhere in the world, in some layer of the material. The Furtive Pygmy's story has a complete version somewhere in the sediment. The truth of Velka's judgment is written in a book that has been kept since before the Age of Fire began. The coffin next to Nito's held someone, and that someone has a name and a history, and if you could go deep enough, past all the layers of kingdoms and fire and dark, you would find it. The game trusts that we know this. It gives us fragments because it trusts us to understand that fragments imply wholes. The whole is there. We just cannot reach it. And maybe that is the most honest thing it could offer. A world where everything that ever mattered is still present somewhere, still real, still happening in whatever preserved layer of time it occupies. Just inaccessible to us from where we stand. Not gone, just deep. The past is not lost. It is just below you. Wherever you are right now, there are layers beneath you too. Things that happened in that space before you were there. People who stood where you were standing and looked up at the same ceiling or the same sky and thought their thoughts. The thickness of time accumulates everywhere, not just in a video game. Dark Souls does what great fiction always does. It makes you feel the weight of time in a way that clarifies the feeling of what it is to be the current moment sitting on top of all those layers. It gives you the shape of depth, and then lets you carry that shape back into your own world. The fire will fade. It has always faded, and then someone will light another one. That has always been the plan. Sleep well, good hunter. May the morning find you rested, and the mysteries no less beautiful for having been held gently through the night. End of final script, one last fire, the Solaire question, and the sun's true face. Before we fully close the last bonfire for the night, there is a mystery that has haunted the community since 2011, and that demands at least a few quiet minutes of consideration. There is a knight in the undead burg named Solaire of Astora. He wears golden armor. He worships the sun with an openness and sincerity that feels out of place in a world as worn and cynical as Lordran. He calls it his sun, though he cannot find it. He says this without irony, without despair, with a kind of wistful warmth that makes him one of the most beloved characters in all of gaming. When you first encounter him, standing on a bridge with his arms spread wide, face tilted up toward the light, he is completely at ease with the fact that everyone around him thinks he is at least a little strange. Jolly cooperation, he says. The phrase became a meme, then an endearment, then a genuine cultural touchstone for the entire Souls community. Solaire represents something the rest of the game rarely allows. Uncomplicated goodness. He helps. He wants to help. He asks for nothing beyond the mutual support of fellow warriors walking through the same dark world. And he maintains this position through enormous hardship and across multiple encounters throughout the game. His fate, in the default playthrough, is one of the most devastating things the game can do to you. In Lost Izalith, if you do not follow the steps of his questline carefully, you find him hollowed, crouching over a maggot that he has mistaken for his son, broken in the place where his optimism finally met something it could not overcome. his mind shattered in the chaos of lost Izalith, in the ruins of the witch's failed experiment, in a darkness that his golden armor and his open heart were not enough to withstand. But you can save him. If you find a specific crevice in a specific wall in demon ruins, and seal it while a certain covenant is active, you can prevent the maggot from ever reaching Solaire. He survives. He helps you fight Gwyn. And at the end, he speaks of finding his son, still seeking, still hopeful, still walking forward. The question that the community has debated since the game released is, who is Solaire, really? Not in the mechanical sense, but in the lore sense. Where did he come from? What is his actual relationship to the sun, and to the covenant he started? The warriors of sunlight, whose altar is a broken statue in the undead parish, are his covenant. That altar was once whole, once depicted someone, before it was defaced and half demolished. The statue is, contextually, almost certainly Gwyn's firstborn, the god of war, the Nameless King. The most prominent early theory was that Solaire is the Nameless King, Gwyn's firstborn, stripped of his name and his memory by the act of being disowned, wandering as a human pilgrim in search of something he once was. The golden armor, the lightning miracles, the sun worship, the slightly defensive quality in his voice when he speaks about being called mad for his beliefs. All of it fits a man who was once the greatest of his father's children and is now trying to find his way back to something he cannot quite name. Dark Souls 3 essentially answered this theory by introducing the Nameless King himself as a specific boss with a specific design and a specific set of confirmed lore details. And none of them quite match Solaire. The Nameless King is enormous and dragon riding and has not been a humble foot soldier in anyone's memory. If he is in the game at all as a normal human, it would require a level of transformation that the lore does not support. But something in the theory resonates even after the Nameless King has been revealed, because it captures something true about Solaire, even if the specific identification is wrong. He carries himself like someone who once had more and came down to having only himself and decided that was enough. He has the ease of someone who has already lost the thing they were most afraid of losing and discovered that they are still standing. The search for his son is not panicked. It is patient. It is the search of someone who has been looking for a long time and has made peace with the process of looking. Whoever Solaire was before the story, the Solaire you encounter in Lordran is someone who has already survived something. The golden armor was not always traveling armor. The quest lines and item descriptions place Astora as a distant land of some reputation, somewhere with enough structure to produce properly trained knights who wear proper heraldry. He has left that behind. He is here, in the dark, looking for a son he calls his own. If you save him, he fights beside you at the end against the Lord of Cinder himself, against Gwyn. He stands at your side in the most important fight in the world, this smiling knight in borrowed light, and he holds his ground. Whatever he was, that is what he is. The man who stands with you when the fire is dying. The one who keeps looking, who stays gentle, who does not let the weight of this world turn him into what the world usually makes of people who feel things as openly as he does. He found his son in the end, or something that worked as well. That is not a bad answer to the mystery of Solaire. That is not a bad answer at all. Now the bonfires are finally, truly going out. The last ember of this long night of mysteries is cooling into gray ash. Somewhere in the dark, Nito is still doing his work. Gwendolyn's illusion still flickers over empty halls. The furtive pygmy's plan is still unfolding in every human heartbeat, patient and inevitable. The painted world still holds its quiet winter. The Nameless King still rides his storm drake along the edge of the sky. And you are still here, in the comfortable dark, carrying fragments of all of it. That is what these games do. They give you pieces of something vast and beautiful and full of questions, and you carry those pieces with you. And sometimes in the quiet hours you take them out and look at them, and they mean something that shifts slightly each time, a little different each year, a little more resonant or a little more uncertain, growing with whatever you have been through since last you looked. That is the highest thing a story can do. Sleep now. The mysteries will be here when you wake.